They tried to frame me for theft. Now they're the ones with criminal records. I, 28, always had a special relationship with my grandmother Helen. Unlike my cousins Marcus, 31, Diane, 29, and Trevor, 26. I was the one who drove her to doctor's appointments, fixed her leaky faucet, brought groceries when she couldn't get out. My cousins showed up twice a year, Thanksgiving and Christmas, and always left with cash or something they borrowed and never returned. Grandma passed 3 months ago, heart failure. I was there when it happened, holding her hand in the hospital. My cousins didn't make it in time, though they all lived within 30 minutes of her. The will reading was tense. She left her house to be sold and split between all of us, but her jewelry collection came to me. It wasn't worth a fortune or anything, maybe $15,000 total, but it had pieces from her travels, her wedding set, things that actually meant something. The moment the lawyer said my name, I saw Marcus's jaw clench. Diane's eyes went cold. Trevor just stared at the table. At the funeral, they barely spoke to me. When they did, it was pointed comments about how convenient it was that I'd been around so much at the end. How I must have influenced her. I ignored it. I was grieving, and I didn't have the energy for their jealousy. 1 week later, Marcus called a family meeting at Aunt Carol's house. I should have known something was wrong when everyone was already there when I arrived. They were waiting for me. Diane didn't waste time. She stood up the second I walked in and accused me of stealing grandmother's diamond earrings and a vintage gold bracelet. Said those pieces should have been in the estate inventory, but mysteriously weren't. Said I must have taken them before anyone could document what was there. I tried to defend myself, but Marcus cut me off. He had proof, a photo from 2 years ago showing Grandma wearing the earrings, as if that proved anything. Trevor joined in, saying he'd seen the bracelet just a month before she died, implying I'd pocketed it during one of my visits. My aunt and uncles didn't even ask for my side. They just piled on. Uncle Phil lectured me about family values. Aunt Carol cried about how disappointed Grandma would be. My own parents weren't there, but when I called them afterward, they said I should just apologize and make peace, even though I hadn't done anything wrong. The family group chat exploded. I was called greedy, a thief, manipulative. Cousins I hadn't seen in years suddenly had opinions. People started blocking me on social media. I'd never felt so alone. 2 weeks after the funeral, I got a call from a police detective. My stomach dropped. Marcus had filed an official report. They'd accused me of stealing from the estate, and now I had to come down to the station for questioning. I sat in my car outside the police station, hands shaking, wondering how my own family could do this to me. That's when I remembered something. Something they had no idea about. I need to go back 6 months to explain how I knew the truth. Grandma had started noticing things going missing. Small stuff at first, $20 from her purse, a silver picture frame that used to sit on her mantel, some collectible coins my grandfather left her. She mentioned it to me one afternoon while I was fixing her garbage disposal. She thought maybe she was just forgetting where she put things, but I could tell she suspected something else. I asked her directly if she thought someone was taking things. She got quiet, then admitted she'd noticed items disappearing after my cousins visited. She had no proof, though, and didn't want to accuse anyone without being sure. That's when I suggested the security camera. I told her it was for her safety, since she lived alone. She agreed immediately. We installed a small hidden camera in her bedroom, angled to cover her dresser and jewelry box. It recorded continuously and uploaded everything to cloud storage. We didn't tell anyone else about it. Back to the present, sitting in that police station. The detective, a middle-aged guy named Rodriguez, asked me to walk him through my relationship with my grandmother, when I last saw her, what I knew about the jewelry. His tone wasn't friendly. I was clearly a suspect. Then I told him about the security camera. His whole demeanor changed. He sat up straighter, asked if I still had access to the footage. I said yes. Everything was backed up online. He asked me to pull it and send it over. I went home and started reviewing the footage from the past 6 months. It didn't take long to find what I was looking for. 4 months before Grandma died, there was Trevor, sneaking into her bedroom while she napped in the living room. He opened her jewelry box, looked around, and slipped a brooch into his pocket. 3 months before, Diane was in there trying on rings in front of the mirror. She pocketed 2 of them before leaving. 2 months before, Marcus went through the entire jewelry box methodically, taking several pieces and putting them in his jacket. But the worst one was from 1 week before Grandma passed. All 3 of them were in her room together while she was at a doctor's appointment. They went through everything systematically, dividing items between them, holding pieces up to the light, discussing which ones were worth more. It was calculated. It was planned. I compiled everything, noted the timestamps, matched the items in the video to the pieces they'd claimed I stole. The diamond earrings Diane accused me of taking, she was literally wearing them in the footage from 2 months ago. The bracelet, Marcus had it. I sent everything to Detective Rodriguez in 1 email and waited. 3 days later, he called back. He'd reviewed all of it. He said the evidence was clear, and they'd be pursuing charges against all 3 of my cousins for theft. Additionally, because they'd filed a false police report against me, they were being charged with fraud. He apologized for how the initial interview went and thanked me for my cooperation. I hung up and sat there in silence. It was really happening. They were going to face consequences for once in their lives. Within a week, all 3 of them were arrested and charged. The family group chat that had been tearing me apart went completely silent for about 2 days. Then, it exploded worse than before. Aunt Carol called me screaming. She demanded I destroy the footage, said I was ruining her son's life over a misunderstanding. Uncle Phil tried a different approach, saying if I dropped everything, they'd drop their accusations too. I had to explain that it wasn't up to me anymore. The state was pressing charges. There was nothing I could do even if I wanted to. My parents finally reached out. They apologized for not believing me initially. They'd seen the footage by then. Detective Rodriguez had shown it to them as part of the investigation. My mom cried on the phone. My dad just kept saying he was sorry. The extended family fractured. Some people still insisted I'd somehow set my cousins up, that I'd orchestrated the whole thing to make them look bad. Others finally started seeing the pattern. Grandma's friends came forward with stories about lending my cousins money that never got paid back, about items that went missing after they visited. Things people had just accepted for years suddenly made sense. Marcus pleaded guilty. He had a prior record from college, something about check fraud, so his lawyer told him not to risk trial. He got probation and community service. Diane fought her charges, convinced she could win. She lost. Criminal record and a fine. Trevor's lawyer tried claiming it was all a family misunderstanding, but the judge wasn't buying it. All 3 of them have criminal records now. They were also ordered to return the items or pay restitution. I got back several pieces that were recovered from their homes. Some things were already gone, though, probably pawned months ago. But the pieces that mattered most, Grandma's favorite necklace, her wedding ring, those were in the collection she'd left to me. They'd never gotten their hands on those. A few weeks after everything settled, I was going through Grandma's things and found a journal. She'd kept it in the last year of her life. There was an entry from 7 months ago where she wrote about suspecting my cousins, about being grateful that I genuinely cared about her and wasn't just waiting for her to die. The last line got me. She wrote that if anything happened to her, she knew I'd remember the camera. She'd known. She'd protected me, even after she was gone. Most of the family has cut off my cousins now. Their parents are still bitter toward me, but I can live with that. Holidays are awkward. I don't go to the big family gatherings anymore, but I've gotten closer to my immediate family and some of Grandma's old friends. Last week I got a Facebook message from Diane's daughter, Emma. She's 18 now. The message said she knew what her mom did was wrong and asked if we could talk. Then she added that there was something about her grandmother, my Aunt Carol, that I should know. I've been staring at that message for 3 days now. Part of me wants to delete it and move on with my life. But what if there's more to this? What if Grandma wasn't the only one they were stealing from? Uncle convinced my girlfriend I had terminal cancer to make her leave. Found out my uncle had been telling my girlfriend I was dying of brain cancer to convince her to break up with me before I wasted her youth. I'm healthy. No cancer. No terminal illness. Just an uncle who thought my relationship was moving too fast. My girlfriend Emma started acting distant 3 months ago, crying randomly, asking about my bucket list, wanting to spend quality time together with unusual intensity. I thought she was stressed about work. Then she broke up with me, said she couldn't watch me die and needed to leave before she got more attached. I was confused until she mentioned my brain tumor. What brain tumor? She showed me texts from my Uncle Robert, my dad's brother who I've known my whole life. Messages detailing my diagnosis, my prognosis, my decision not to tell her to avoid being a burden. Fake doctor appointments, fabricated medical updates, elaborate timeline of my supposed decline. Stage 4 glioblastoma, 6 months to live. He doesn't want you to know because he loves you too much to watch you suffer watching him die. None of it true. I've never had cancer, never been to an oncologist, never told my uncle anything about serious illness because there was nothing to tell. Confronted Robert immediately. He admitted everything. Said Emma and I had only been dating 8 months. Too soon for serious commitment. He thought if she believed I was dying, she'd leave for her own good, and I'd understand eventually. He'd fabricated terminal cancer to break up my relationship. Reported to police. Fraud, harassment, intentional infliction of emotional distress. Emma filed report too. She'd grieved a death that never happened. Police investigation revealed the scope of Robert's deception. He'd created fake medical documents, letterhead from local hospital, fabricated doctor signatures, detailed treatment plan. He'd researched brain cancer symptoms to make his story convincing. Forensics traced the documents to Robert's home printer. He'd spent weeks creating an entire fake medical history for me. Diagnosis reports, MRI results, images downloaded from medical websites, even a DNR form he claimed I'd signed. He'd shown these to Emma during a chance encounter at a coffee shop he knew she frequented. Asked her to keep it secret because I was in denial and refusing to face reality. Told her I'd be angry if I knew she knew, so she should just distance herself gently. Emma had been heartbroken for months. She'd grieved my upcoming death, planned how to support me, researched glioblastoma, joined online support groups for partners of terminal patients, all based on Robert's lies. During interrogation, Robert defended himself. They barely knew each other. She was going to waste years on him, and he was going to waste his youth in a premature, serious relationship. I was helping them both. By telling her I was dying of brain cancer? By giving her a reason to leave before it got more serious. You're only 24. You shouldn't be settling down with the first girl you date after college. Police charged him with fraud, fake medical documents, identity theft, forging my signature on DNR, harassment, and conspiracy to commit fraud. Each fake document was separate charge. Hospital threatened lawsuit for forging their letterhead. Real doctors whose signatures Robert forged filed complaints. Emma and I tried to reconcile, but damage was done. She'd spent 3 months believing I was dying. The emotional trauma made continuing our relationship impossible. We stayed friends, but the relationship Robert destroyed stayed destroyed. My dad initially defended his brother. Misguided, but meant well. Changed his mind when he saw the fake medical records Robert created, including forged death timeline and fabricated neurologist notes. Trial showed premeditation. Robert had researched terminal cancer symptoms for 6 weeks before approaching Emma. He'd joined online cancer forums to learn realistic disease progression. He'd studied medical terminology to make documents convincing. Prosecutor. Defendant created elaborate medical fraud to destroy his nephew's relationship. He forged hospital documents, impersonated medical professionals, and caused severe emotional distress to both victims. Emma testified through tears. I spent 3 months preparing to lose someone I loved, joined grief counseling, researched hospice care, made memory books, all for a death that never existed. Expert witnesses testified about psychological harm. Being told your partner is dying, then learning it was a lie, creates complex trauma. Grief without resolution, betrayal by trusted family, inability to trust future information. Robert's lawyer argued he had unconventional methods but good intentions. Prosecutor countered with evidence of calculated deception, fake doctor signatures, forged medical tests, fabricated hospital records. Judge was harsh. You didn't just lie. You created an entire false medical reality. You traumatized 2 young people, wasted grief counseling resources, and forged official medical documents. This wasn't misguided concern, this was systematic fraud. Convicted all counts. Sentenced to 3 years prison, 5 years probation, mandatory mental health treatment, restitution for Emma's therapy costs, and permanent restraining order from me and Emma. Hospitals sued separately for forging their letterhead. Medical board filed complaints about impersonating doctors. Robert faces additional civil liability. I'm healthy. No cancer. No terminal illness. Just permanent family fracture from uncle who thought fake terminal diagnosis was appropriate relationship intervention. Emma and I aren't together. Robert's lies killed the relationship he wanted ended, just not how he planned. She can't look at me without remembering 3 months of anticipatory grief. 3 years Robert's serving. 8 months Emma and I dated before his interference. 73 fake medical documents he created. Numbers that tell the story. Uncle imprisoned. Relationship destroyed. Medical fraud gets medical consequences. Living healthy while Robert serves time for fake cancer. He wanted to end my relationship. Succeeded through fraud instead of letting it run its natural course. Career intact. Health perfect. Relationship ended by lies, not by choice. That's enough. Sister hired someone to impersonate me at my PhD defense. My sister sent an imposter to my doctoral defense claiming to be me so I'd fail and she could claim my research fellowship. I'm finishing my PhD in molecular biology. My sister Lauren is ABD, all but dissertation, in the same program at different university. We've always been competitive. 3 weeks before my defense, Lauren asked detailed questions about my research, my committee members, the defense format. Said she wanted to prepare for her own eventual defense. I shared everything: presentation structure, likely questions, committee personalities. Day of defense, I arrived to find someone already presenting my research. A woman who looked vaguely like me, same height, similar hair, standing at the podium with my slides, introducing herself as me. She was 20 minutes into my defense. My committee chair looked confused when I walked in. The imposter saw me and panicked, tried to continue presenting. I interrupted. That's not me. I don't know who that is, but I'm the actual doctoral candidate. Security removed her. She'd presented a convincing student ID, altered photo with my name, and known enough about my research to fool the administrative assistant who checked her in. Investigation revealed Lauren had hired her, found their communications planning everything. Research summary I'd shared with Lauren, details about my committee, even coaching on how to answer expected questions. Lauren's goal: imposter fails the defense under my name, I'm dismissed from program, and Lauren takes the research fellowship I'd been awarded. She'd paid this woman $2,000 to impersonate me at the most important academic event of my life. The imposter confessed everything during university investigation. Lauren had found her through a graduate student tutoring service, showed her all my research materials, coached her for weeks. The plan was elaborate. Fake ID created by Lauren's friend, rehearsed responses to anticipated questions, even backstory about family emergency if anyone noticed behavioral differences. Lauren's motivation became clear during disciplinary hearing. She'd been rejected for the same research fellowship I'd won. Fellowship included 2-year postdoc position, publication funding, prestigious lab placement, worth over $150,000 in total value and career advancement. Her plan? I failed defense spectacularly with imposter's poor performance. Fellowship withdrawn. Lauren, still in good standing at her university, becomes next candidate. She takes the fellowship. I'm academically ruined. University took it seriously. Academic fraud, identity theft, conspiracy to commit fraud. Lauren, expelled from her PhD program immediately. Her university revoked all degrees earned, including her master's. All her publications under review for authenticity. Police charged her with identity fraud and conspiracy. The imposter faced lesser charges after cooperating. She'd thought it was a prank initially. Realized too late it was serious academic fraud. My defense was rescheduled. Committee members apologized profusely. They'd started to suspect something was wrong when I couldn't answer basic questions about methodology I'd spent 5 years developing. Successfully defended 2 weeks later. Fellowship secured. Lauren's academic career destroyed. She sent message, "You always got everything. I just wanted one thing that was supposed to be mine." The fellowship was never hers. She never even qualified for finalist round. Some family members think I should have declined to press charges. She's your sister. She made a mistake. A mistake requires accident. This was calculated fraud planned over months. Trial proceeded with overwhelming evidence. Text messages between Lauren and imposter planning every detail. Payment records showing $2,000 wire transfer. Fake student ID with my name and imposter's photo. My research materials Lauren had shared with hired woman. Prosecutor presented it as calculated academic sabotage. Defendant attempted to destroy her sister's career through fraud, identity theft, and elaborate deception. This wasn't sibling rivalry. This was systematic destruction of years of work. University officials testified about severity. Doctoral defenses are sacred academic events. Sending an imposter strikes at the heart of academic integrity. If successful, this fraud would have destroyed the victim's career and damaged our institution's credibility. Imposter testified against Lauren. She'd initially believed it was a performance art project, but realized during the defense it was real fraud. She'd tried to back out days before, but Lauren threatened to report her for breach of contract and withhold payment. Lauren's defense claimed temporary emotional breakdown from academic stress. Prosecutor destroyed this with months of planning evidence. Fake ID created 6 weeks before defense. Tutoring sessions with imposter starting 2 months prior. Detailed research materials stolen and shared over 3-month period. Defense committee members testified about the disruption. We'd started the defense process with someone we thought was the candidate. The real candidate's arrival revealed elaborate fraud. The emotional distress, the violation of academic trust, immeasurable. Lauren convicted on identity fraud, conspiracy, and academic fraud charges. Sentenced to 2 years in prison, 3 years probation, restitution for university investigation costs, and permanent ban from attending any university in the state system. The imposter received 6 months in probation. She'd cooperated fully once she understood the severity. I completed my PhD. fellowship awarded, published my research in a top journal. Lauren's name appears nowhere in academia anymore. Her publications retracted, her degrees revoked, her academic identity erased. She wanted my fellowship. She wanted my research recognition. She wanted my academic success. She got a criminal record, academic expulsion, and 2 years in prison. I'm doctor now. She's not even allowed on campus. 2 years she'll serve. 5 years I spent on my PhD. $20,000 in restitution she owes the university. Numbers that matter. Defense successful. Fellowship awarded. Career launched. Everything she tried to steal. Everything I earned anyway. Lauren imprisoned. Me graduated. Academic fraud gets academic erasure. Sister wanted to be me for 1 day. Lost her own identity permanently instead. Published, employed, thriving in my research career, while she serves time for trying to take it. That's enough. Brother faked hate crimes against himself and blamed me. My brother filed false police reports claiming I was committing hate crimes against him because he's gay. I'm not homophobic. I'm also gay. He knew false accusations would destroy my career in education. Started 6 months ago with graffiti on his car, slurs, threats, hateful messages. He reported it to police, said he suspected me because we'd argued about him borrowing my tools without asking. Police questioned me. I had alibi. Then his apartment was vandalized. More slurs, broken windows, threatening notes. Again, he implied I was involved. Police investigated. Again, solid alibi. Third incident. Threatening letters sent to his workplace saying, "We know what you are," and graphic threats. Postmarked from my zip code. Employer contacted police. I was teaching when letters were mailed. Fourth incident got me arrested. Someone spray-painted slurs on the community center where he volunteers. Witness, saw someone matching my description, fleeing the scene. I was detained overnight, despite being provably at a school function with 200 witnesses. Charges dropped quickly due to airtight alibis, but damage was done. School district put me on administrative leave during investigation. Community members who knew about the allegations looked at me differently. Then my brother made a mistake. He filed a report about threatening emails sent while I was in police custody. Literally impossible for me to send them since I had no phone or computer access. Police started investigating him instead. Found evidence he'd staged everything. Purchased spray paint matching vandalism. Search history for how to fake hate crimes. Drafts of threatening letters on his computer. He'd committed hate crimes against himself to frame me. Detective told me the full scope. My brother had meticulously planned each incident to build a case against me while maintaining plausible deniability. He'd researched my schedule, created false evidence when he knew I had alibis that weren't perfect, and escalated each incident to make me look more dangerous. His motive emerged during interrogation: professional jealousy. I'm a high school teacher, well-respected, recently promoted to department chair. He works retail, dropped out of community college, resents my success. He thought framing me for hate crimes would get me fired, destroy my reputation, and level the playing field. The fact that we're both gay made his scheme more twisted. He was using our shared identity as a weapon, filing false hate crime reports that wasted police resources and traumatized the LGBTQ community who believed they had a violent homophobe in their midst. Security footage police obtained showed him spray painting his own car in a grocery store parking lot at 2 a.m. Ring camera from neighbor caught him breaking his own apartment window. His fingerprints were on the threatening letters. He'd forgotten to wear gloves for the third batch. The witness, who saw someone matching my description at the community center vandalism? My brother had asked a friend to lie, claiming it was a prank. Friend confessed when faced with obstruction charges. Police found his planning documents, schedules of my whereabouts, notes on which incidents would be most damaging to his career. even cost calculations for spray paint and supplies. Prosecutor was furious. False hate crime reports waste resources, traumatize communities, and make real victims less likely to be believed. Your brother weaponized identity-based violence for personal vendetta. Charged with filing false police reports, 6 counts, evidence tampering, fraud, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy. Each false report carried separate penalties. School district investigation cleared me completely. Returned to work with formal apology. Community center issued statement explaining I'd been falsely accused. Trial revealed premeditation spanning 8 months. My brother had started planning before the first incident, buying supplies, researching hate crime response procedures, and documenting my schedule to create opportunities for framing me. Evidence presented. Receipts for spray paint matching vandalism, computer search history showing how to make threats look real, drafts of threatening letters saved on his laptop, and security footage of him staging incidents. Detective testified, "We've investigated hundreds of hate crimes. This defendant manufactured every element, physical evidence, witness testimony, timeline, to frame his brother while making himself appear victimized." LGBTQ advocacy groups testified about harm. False hate crime reports damage real victims' credibility. When someone fabricates attacks, it makes investigators skeptical of genuine incidents. The defendant's actions hurt his entire community. My testimony focused on professional damage. I was placed on administrative leave. Parents questioned whether I should teach their children. Colleagues avoided me. My reputation was destroyed based on lies my own brother created. School administrator confirmed, "We received dozens of calls demanding the teacher be fired. We had to investigate thoroughly despite strong alibi evidence. The disruption to students and staff was significant." Brother's defense claimed mental health crisis, but prosecutor showed calculated planning incompatible with impaired judgment. Months of preparation, careful evidence creation, strategic timing, all indicated clear intent. Judge: "You didn't just file false reports. You created elaborate hate crime hoaxes targeting your brother while cynically exploiting bias-based violence concerns. You weaponized both the justice system and community fear of hate crimes." Convicted on all counts. Sentenced to 4 years prison, 5 years probation, restitution to police department for investigation costs, mandatory mental health treatment, and permanent restraining order. Additionally required to issue public apology to LGBTQ community and victims of actual hate crimes whose credibility he damaged. School district welcomed me back with full support. Community center named an award after me for resilience in face of false accusations. Career intact. Reputation restored. Brother imprisoned for staging hate crimes against himself to destroy me. 4 years he's serving. 6 false reports he filed. 8 months he planned to frame me. Numbers that matter. Brother imprisoned. My career saved. False accusations get real consequences. Teaching again. Reputation cleared. Community support restored. Everything he tried to destroy. Everything that survived his lies. Hate crime hoaxes punished. Truth protected. Justice for the falsely accused. That's enough. Parents secretly recorded my therapy sessions to use against me in court. Discovered my parents had been recording my private therapy sessions for 6 months to gather evidence for a guardianship petition. I'm 22, living independently, seeing a therapist for anxiety. My mother insisted on driving me to appointments since my car was unreliable. I thought she was being helpful. She wasn't just driving me. She was sitting in the parking lot with a recording device, capturing my sessions through the thin office walls. 42 therapy sessions recorded without my knowledge or consent. Found out when her lawyer accidentally included the recordings in discovery documents for a guardianship case I didn't know existed. My parents were petitioning the court to declare me mentally incompetent based on evidence from my own therapy sessions taken out of context. She admits to daily anxiety attacks and inability to make decisions. me discussing normal anxiety symptoms with my therapist, now being used to claim I can't manage my own life. Reported to police immediately. Illegal recording of confidential medical appointments. Therapist's office sued for privacy violations. Parents charged with wiretapping and fraud on the court. Their lawyer withdrew after learning the evidence was obtained illegally. Guardianship petition dismissed with prejudice. Judge sanctioned them for attempting to use illegally obtained medical records. Parents claimed they were concerned about my well-being. The 42 recordings proved otherwise. They were building a case to control my life and decisions. Therapist moved to a soundproof office. I got a protective order. Parents face trial next month. They recorded my most vulnerable moments to take away my legal autonomy. Some concern. The recordings revealed the full scope of their plan. Not just guardianship. They wanted control of my healthcare decisions, living arrangements, and eventual inheritance from my grandmother. Digital forensics found their plan documented in emails. Once we have guardianship, we can move her back home, control her medical treatment, and manage her assets. Assets I don't even have yet. My grandmother is still alive. They'd researched adult guardianship laws for months, found a lawyer willing to file based on family concerns without meeting me. Recorded my therapy specifically to gather ammunition. The recordings were edited. My therapist saying, "That's a normal response to stress," was cut to just me describing the stress. Context removed to make me sound incompetent instead of someone managing normal anxiety. Their lawyer had prepared testimony from concerned family friends who'd never met me. Character witnesses claiming I was unstable and needed supervision. All coordinated before I even knew about the guardianship petition. Police found the recording equipment in my mother's car. Professional grade, not a phone app. They'd invested in surveillance equipment specifically for this purpose. My therapist was horrified. Therapy only works with confidentiality. Your parents violated the fundamental principle of mental health care. She's testifying at their trial about the harm caused by recording private sessions. Prosecutor is pursuing felony charges. Recording medical appointments is serious. Using those recordings to file fraudulent court petitions is worse. They face prison time. I've gone no contact, changed my phone number, moved without telling them where. They tried to show up at my old apartment. Police escorted them away. Extended family is divided. Some think I'm overreacting. They just wanted to help. Others are horrified. They were trying to take away your legal rights. Grandmother changed her will. Whatever they were hoping to control is now in a trust they can't access. Trial is in 3 weeks. Evidence includes 42 recordings, emails planning the guardianship, and testimony about the fabricated petition. The prosecutor says it's the most clear-cut case of guardianship fraud she's seen. Parents still claim they were acting out of love. Love doesn't record your child's therapy sessions to build a court case against them. Trial concluded. Both parents convicted on all counts: illegal recording, wire fraud, conspiracy, and attempted guardianship fraud. Mother got 18 months in prison. Father got 15 months. Both sentenced to probation after release, ordered to have no contact with me, and banned from filing any future petitions regarding my welfare. Judge was scathing. You violated your daughter's medical privacy, her trust, and attempted to strip her legal autonomy through fraud. You weaponized mental health care against the person seeking help. The damage to the therapeutic relationship and your daughter's ability to trust others is incalculable. Therapist's testimony was damning. She described how therapy requires absolute confidentiality, how my parents' recordings destroyed that safety, and how I now struggle to be vulnerable in sessions, knowing family once used my honesty against me. The edited recordings were played in court. Jury heard the full context versus what my parents' lawyer had submitted. The manipulation was obvious, taking "I sometimes feel overwhelmed" and cutting the therapist's response, "That's completely normal and manageable with the techniques we're learning." Their plan unraveled completely. Emails showed they'd discussed selling my grandmother's house once they had guardianship, moving me into a supervised living situation, and managing my care, which meant controlling every aspect of my life. Grandmother testified. She was 78 and furious. My granddaughter is competent, independent, and managing her mental health responsibly. Her parents are the unstable ones. She'd already changed her will, but wanted it on record. Several concerned family friends who'd agreed to testify for my parents withdrew once they learned about the illegal recordings. 2 apologized to me directly. I've been in therapy with a new therapist in a soundproof office, working through the betrayal and trust issues from having my parents record my most vulnerable moments. They'll be released in about a year. The protective order extends 5 years beyond their release. I'll be nearly 30 before they're legally allowed to contact me. By then, I'll have built a life they can't surveil, record, or manipulate. They wanted guardianship, got prison instead. I wanted help managing anxiety, got a lesson in how family can weaponize mental health care. 18 months they'll serve, 42 sessions they recorded. 22 years I lived before learning my parents would violate my medical privacy for control. Numbers that tell the story. Parents imprisoned. My autonomy protected. Therapy confidentiality restored. Everything they tried to take. Everything I kept. Court protected what they tried to destroy. Living independently. Managing my own life. Proving their guardianship petition was always fraudulent. That's enough. Cousin replaced my epilepsy medication with vitamins to make me lose my driver's license. Discovered my cousin had been switching my epilepsy medication with look-alike vitamins for 5 months to cause seizures that would revoke my driving privileges. I'm epileptic, controlled with medication, haven't had a seizure in 3 years. My cousin Lisa desperately wanted my car. Started having breakthrough seizures despite perfect medication compliance. Neurologist was confused. Blood tests showed inconsistent drug levels despite me taking pills religiously. Had 3 seizures in 2 months. DMV suspended my license pending medical clearance. Lisa immediately offered to help by driving me places. She also mentioned several times how she'd take good care of my car if I couldn't drive anymore. Found pills scattered in my bathroom after a seizure. They looked like my medication but were lighter. Took them to pharmacist. Vitamin B complex, not anti-epileptic drugs. Checked my medication bottle carefully. Pills were identical in appearance to my prescription, but subtly different weight. Someone had replaced my seizure medication with vitamins that looked similar enough to fool me. Installed hidden camera in my apartment. Caught Lisa entering with spare key I'd given her for emergencies, going to my medicine cabinet, and systematically replacing pills. She'd dump out a week's worth of real medication and refill the bottle with vitamins she'd brought. She'd been doing this for 5 months. Every seizure was caused by her deliberately denying me medication. She wanted me to lose my license permanently so she could claim she needed my car, since I couldn't use it anyway. Reported to police immediately. Tampering with prescription medication. Endangerment. She'd caused medical emergencies to steal my vehicle. Police found evidence of premeditation. Lisa had researched my specific medication online, found look-alike vitamins, and purchased them in bulk. Browser history showed searches for how long until seizures return without medication, and how many seizures before license suspended. Text messages to her boyfriend revealed the plan. She'll have another seizure soon. After the 3rd one, they'll take her license. Then I can use her car. She won't need it if she can't drive. She'd calculated exactly how many seizures would trigger license suspension. 3 within 6 months. She'd timed her medication tampering to cause seizures spaced perfectly to hit that threshold. Medical records showed dangerous pattern. Each seizure occurred exactly when my blood medication levels dropped, when I was unknowingly taking vitamins instead of real drugs. Neurologist testified the seizures were entirely preventable and directly caused by medication denial. Lisa's defense was stunning. She claimed she was helping me accept reality, that I shouldn't be driving anyway with epilepsy, and she was forcing me to acknowledge my limitations. Prosecutor destroyed this. Defendant didn't help. She systematically poisoned her cousin by replacing life-saving medication with vitamins. She caused 3 preventable seizures, medical emergencies requiring hospitalization, and revocation of driving privileges. Her motive was stealing a vehicle. Evidence showed Lisa had been planning to purchase my car for cheap once I couldn't drive anymore. She'd already contacted DMV to ask about transferring registration from someone with suspended license. My neurologist was horrified. Patient had been seizure-free for 3 years on medication. The breakthrough seizures made no medical sense until we learned the medication was being replaced with vitamins. Every seizure was iatrogenic, caused by deliberate interference. Charged with assault, reckless endangerment, pharmaceutical tampering, and conspiracy to commit fraud. Each medication replacement counted as separate assault charge. Trial revealed 5 months of systematic medication sabotage. Lisa had replaced my anti-epileptic drugs with vitamins 23 separate times, each instance documented through her purchases and my missing medication. Prosecutor presented timeline. Defendant visited victim's apartment every week to 10 days, replaced a week's worth of seizure medication with vitamins, then documented victim's declining health with fake concern while planning to acquire the vehicle. Security footage showed 23 visits where Lisa accessed medicine cabinet. Each time, she'd empty pill bottle, pocket real medication, and refill with vitamins. She'd researched the pills carefully to find vitamins that matched size and color. Medical expert testimony explained danger. Epilepsy patients depend on consistent medication levels. Defendant's tampering created dangerous fluctuations that triggered seizures. Each seizure carries risk of injury or death. The defendant knowingly caused life-threatening medical events. Evidence of 3 seizure-related ER visits. Each time, medical staff were confused by seizures in previously well-controlled patient. Blood tests showed low medication levels despite reported compliance. Lisa had attended 2 ER visits, expressing concern while knowing she'd caused the seizures. DMV representative testified about license suspension. After 3 seizures in 6 months, we suspended driving privileges per state law. Defendant had researched this requirement and timed medication tampering to trigger it. Text messages showed celebration. 3rd seizure happened. Her license is gone. Time to talk about the car. Defense claimed misguided attempt to protect cousin from driving. Prosecutor countered with evidence of vehicle acquisition plan, research on how to transfer ownership, and messages about getting the car finally. Judge, you caused medical emergencies through pharmaceutical sabotage. You endangered life repeatedly. You manipulated medical conditions for theft. This is aggravated assault with medication tampering. Convicted all counts. Sentenced to 6 years prison, supervised release, restitution for medical costs, permanent restraining order, and lifetime prohibition from access to anyone's prescription medications. I resumed proper medication immediately after discovery. Been seizure-free for 18 months since Lisa's arrest. License reinstated after 6 months of documented seizure-free status with proper medication levels. Car remains mine. License valid. Health restored. Lisa wanted my car so badly she was willing to cause seizures. Got prison instead. 6 years she's serving. 5 months she sabotaged my medication. 23 times she replaced my pills with vitamins. Numbers that tell the story. Cousin imprisoned. License restored. Health protected from her interference. Driving again with proper medication. Lisa imprisoned for pharmaceutical terrorism. Everything she tried to take. Everything I kept despite her sabotage. Seizure-free. Licensed. Living without her medication tampering. That's enough. Stepmother poisoned my garden to sabotage my horticulture thesis. My stepmother systematically poisoned my research garden with herbicides to destroy my master's thesis in horticulture. Spent 2 years cultivating rare plant specimens for my research on heritage vegetable varieties. Everything died in 3 weeks. Garden was my thesis, documenting growth patterns, seed viability, adaptation to local climate. Irreplaceable specimens from seed banks, some varieties nearly extinct. My research was preserving agricultural biodiversity. Plants started dying mysteriously. Yellowing, wilting, total collapse. Soil tests revealed glyphosate contamination, commercial herbicide. Someone had systematically poisoned every bed. Security camera I'd installed after first plant deaths caught her. My stepmother Sandra, entering my garden at night, spraying herbicide on everything. 7 different visits over 2 weeks. Deliberate, methodical destruction. Confronted her with footage. She admitted it casually. Said my garden was taking too much attention from family activities. My dad spent weekends helping me with garden maintenance instead of home projects with her. She wanted the garden gone. It's just plants. You can start over. 2 years of work. Specimens that took months to source. Research data destroyed. My thesis defense was in 3 months, no time to regrow anything. Reported to university and police. Academic sabotage. Destruction of research materials. Criminal mischief. University took it seriously. Research destruction is academic fraud. Police charged her with criminal mischief and trespassing. My thesis advisor tried salvaging my work, shifted focus to documentation of what was lost, the importance of preservation, the fragility of heritage varieties. Turned disaster into different kind of research. But specimens were gone. Years of work poisoned by stepmother who thought plants were less important than her weekend plans. Investigation revealed Sandra had researched the most effective plant killers. Browser history showed searches for herbicides that leave no trace, how to kill garden completely, and glyphosate application rates. She'd purchased commercial-grade herbicide online, spending $200 on products designed to destroy vegetation. University documentation showed the value of what she destroyed. Rare heirloom seeds from international seed banks, some varieties with fewer than 100 known seeds in existence. I had permissions, research agreements, climate-controlled storage. She'd poisoned irreplaceable genetic material. My thesis advisor testified, "This wasn't a home garden. These were research specimens representing agricultural biodiversity. Some varieties were extinct in their native regions." The student spent 2 years building relationships with seed conservationists worldwide. The loss is catastrophic for the research and the broader mission of crop preservation. Seed banks I'd collaborated with were horrified. One curator said, "We trusted these specimens to responsible researchers. To learn they were deliberately destroyed by family sabotage is devastating." My dad initially defended Sandra. She didn't understand the importance. Changed his mind when he saw the security footage of her methodically spraying every plant, checking to make sure she'd covered everything, returning multiple nights to ensure total destruction. Text messages she'd sent to her sister revealed her real motive. "He spends every weekend with those stupid plants instead of helping around the house. If the garden is gone, he'll have time for actual family." She'd destroyed 2 years of scientific research because she was jealous of time my dad spent helping me with academic work. Prosecutor emphasized premeditation. Defendant researched herbicides, purchased professional-grade plant killers, and systematically destroyed research materials over multiple deliberate visits. This wasn't impulsive. It was calculated sabotage. Trial included expert testimony about research value and damage assessment. Agricultural historians explained the significance of heritage variety preservation. University researchers detailed how my work contributed to biodiversity protection. Prosecutor: Defendant destroyed irreplaceable research specimens because she resented time her stepson and his father spent on scientific work. She researched the most effective poisons, purchased commercial herbicides, and executed systematic destruction over 2 weeks. Security footage played in court showed 7 separate poisoning visits. Sandra entering the garden with spray equipment, methodically covering every plant bed, examining plants to ensure coverage, returning repeatedly to maximize destruction. Evidence of deleted text messages recovered by forensics. The garden will be dead by the end of the month. Then we'll have our weekends back. My testimony focused on research loss. 2 years cultivating relationships with international seed banks. Specimens that represented genetic material unavailable anywhere else. Data collection, tracking growth patterns that can't be replicated. All destroyed because she wanted my father's time on weekends. Seed bank curators testified remotely about the broader impact. Heritage seed preservation is critical work. Losing established research gardens sets back our collective mission. Some of those varieties may now be extinct. We sent her the last known seeds. Judge was scathing. You didn't destroy a hobby garden, you committed academic sabotage, destroyed scientific research, and potentially eliminated plant varieties from existence because you were jealous of your husband's time. Convicted on criminal mischief, destruction of research property, academic sabotage. Sentenced to 2 years prison, 3 years probation, restitution to university and seed banks, community service in agricultural education. University awarded me thesis credit based on documentation of loss and revised research on preservation challenges. Graduated with distinction, despite sabotage. Dad divorced Sandra within 6 months. Said watching the security footage of her poisoning my garden with such deliberate malice showed him who she really was. I'm now working with seed banks to rebuild some of what was lost. Several organizations donated replacement specimens. My thesis on preservation became published research on protecting agricultural biodiversity from both environmental and human threats. Sandra served time for destroying plants she thought were just vegetables. Those vegetables were irreplaceable heritage varieties representing centuries of agricultural development. 2 years she got. 2 years I'd spent on the garden. 7 poisoning visits that killed everything. Numbers that matter. Stepmother imprisoned. Research transformed despite sabotage. Academic career launched from destruction. Working in conservation now. Rebuilding what she destroyed. Publishing research she tried to eliminate. Some plants are gone forever. Her freedom is gone temporarily. Garden destroyed, career built anyway. Sabotage punished. That's enough. Mother-in-law secretly fed my baby formula after I said breastfeeding only. Caught my mother-in-law sneaking formula to my exclusively breastfed infant during unsupervised visits, despite knowing I wanted breastfeeding only for the first 6 months. My daughter is 4 months old. I'm committed to breastfeeding per pediatrician recommendations. Baby started refusing breast after visits to mother-in-law's house. Suddenly fussy, crying during nursing, preferring bottles. Pediatrician said it was unusual for exclusively breastfed baby to develop such strong bottle preference so quickly. Found empty formula containers hidden in mother-in-law Janet's garbage during visit. Confronted her. She admitted she'd been giving my daughter formula every time she babysat, twice weekly for 2 months, because breast milk alone isn't enough, and babies need real food. She'd been undermining my feeding choices for 8 weeks, secretly bottle-feeding formula despite explicit instructions. My daughter had developed nipple confusion, making breastfeeding difficult. Janet defended herself, said breast milk was insufficient and she was supplementing for baby's health. She'd researched formula brands, bought bottles, created entire feeding setup at her house without telling me. I'd specifically chosen breastfeeding. Medical advice supported it. Janet ignored my parenting decisions and secretly fed my infant different nutrition. Reported to pediatrician who documented the interference. Told husband his mother couldn't babysit anymore. He initially defended her. She meant well, until pediatrician explained the damage of unauthorized feeding changes. Janet lost all unsupervised access to her granddaughter. She'd violated basic parenting boundaries by secretly changing my baby's diet. Some family think I'm overreacting. It's just formula. But it's not about formula. It's about secretly undermining parenting decisions regarding my infant's nutrition. Discovered the feeding sabotage went deeper than formula. Janet had kept detailed records, dates, amounts, brands of formula tried. She'd been systematically tracking which formulas my daughter preferred and adjusting her secret feeding schedule. Found notebook at her house documenting 8 weeks of unauthorized feedings. Tuesday, 2 p.m., 4 ounces Similac, took well. Thursday, 10 a.m., 5 ounces Enfamil, finished bottle. Saturday, 3 p.m., 6 ounces Similac, very happy after. She'd been conducting feeding experiments on my infant without my knowledge or consent. Pediatrician was appalled. Mother made informed choice about infant nutrition. Grandmother deliberately undermined that choice, introduced allergen risks without parental knowledge, and caused nipple confusion that's now affecting breastfeeding success. Worse, Janet had given formula without checking ingredients against my daughter's potential allergies. If my baby had cow's milk protein allergy, the formula could have caused serious reaction. Janet never asked about allergies, never informed me she was introducing new foods, just assumed formula was safe. Lactation consultant I'd been working with was furious. You spent weeks establishing breastfeeding. Grandmother destroyed that work by secretly bottle feeding during crucial development period. The nipple confusion may be permanent. Janet's justification evolved. First, claimed breast milk was insufficient. Then said I was too stressed to produce quality milk. Then argued formula was more convenient for babysitting. Finally admitted she just wanted to feed the baby herself, and bottles were easier than supporting breastfeeding. She wanted the experience of bottle feeding her grandchild. So she sabotaged my breastfeeding to create bottle feeding opportunity. Husband finally understood when lactation consultant explained the damage. Your mother deliberately disrupted medical advice and parental choice. She prioritized her preferences over your wife's feeding plan and the baby's established nutrition. Janet sent messages alternating between apologetic and defensive. I'm sorry, but I still think formula is better. I only wanted to help, but you're being unreasonable. Breast milk isn't magical. Formula is perfectly fine. No contact established. Janet lost babysitting privileges entirely. Attempted to restore exclusive breastfeeding, but damage was significant. Daughter had developed strong bottle preference. Lactation consultant worked with us for weeks trying to rebuild nursing relationship. Eventually succeeded partially. Daughter would breastfeed, but not exclusively. Had to supplement because Janet's interference had disrupted supply and established bottle preference. The exact outcome I'd worked to avoid. Janet demanded forgiveness and access to granddaughter. Husband and I established strict conditions. Supervised visits only, no feeding of any kind, written agreement about respecting parenting decisions. She refused. Said conditions were insulting and she'd done nothing wrong. She wanted unsupervised access and feeding privileges restored. We refused. She'd proven untrustworthy with our infant's basic care. She tried recruiting family members to pressure us. Some agreed with her. Formula isn't harmful, you're being controlling. Others supported us. She deliberately went against your wishes for 2 months. Pediatrician provided written statement for family court when Janet threatened grandparent visitation rights. Grandmother's unauthorized feeding changes caused documented harm to breastfeeding relationship and introduced allergen exposure without parental consent or medical supervision. Janet's lawyer reviewed the evidence. 8 weeks of documented secret feedings, medical testimony about harm, detailed records proving premeditation, and advised her to drop the visitation petition. She continued harassing us through relatives, sent messages through husband's siblings claiming she was being punished for loving her grandchild. We maintained boundaries. Supervised visits only when we could attend. No solo time with baby. No feeding responsibilities ever. Eventually, Janet realized we wouldn't relent. She'd destroyed trust by secretly undermining infant feeding choices. That trust couldn't be rebuilt with demands and manipulation. Daughter is now eating solids. Breastfeeding relationship was permanently altered by Janet's interference. We'll never know if exclusive breastfeeding would have continued successfully without her sabotage. Janet sees her granddaughter once monthly at family gatherings. Always supervised, never alone, never feeding. She wanted to feed her grandchild so badly she destroyed my breastfeeding. Got permanent supervised-only access instead. 8 weeks she secretly fed formula. 4 months my daughter was when I discovered it. 18 months we've maintained boundaries. Numbers that matter. Mother-in-law's access permanently restricted. Feeding choices respected under supervision. Breastfeeding damaged but daughter healthy. Parenting decisions protected now. Trust never restored. Boundaries enforced. Everything she took through secret feeding. Everything we rebuilt despite interference. Supervised visits only. No feeding privileges. No unsupervised access. She fed her grandchild without permission. Lost privilege of feeding her ever again. That's enough. Aunt reported my service dog as dangerous to get him removed from my life. My aunt filed false dangerous dog reports with animal control, claiming my psychiatric service dog had attacked multiple people to force him away from me. My dog Ranger is a trained PTSD service dog, never aggressive, never bitten anyone, essential for my mental health management. Started 2 months ago when animal control showed up at my door. Someone reported Ranger had bitten a child at the park. I was confused. Ranger hadn't been to the park that week. I had time-stamped vet appointment records proving we were elsewhere. Second report came 3 weeks later. Ranger allegedly attacked a jogger on my street. Again, fabricated. Security footage from my home showed Ranger in my backyard during the alleged incident. Third report was filed by Witness, claiming Ranger lunged at elderly woman outside grocery store. Store cameras proved Ranger was never there that day. Animal control investigator became suspicious. 3 reports, all unverifiable, all against the same service dog. Investigation revealed all reports filed by the same IP address, traced to my Aunt Patricia's home. She'd been systematically filing false dangerous dog reports, trying to have Ranger seized and euthanized. Her stated goal when confronted, "You rely on that dog too much. You need to learn to function without an emotional crutch." Ranger isn't an emotional crutch. He's a medically prescribed service animal trained to interrupt panic attacks, provide deep pressure therapy, and assist during PTSD episodes. He's essential medical equipment. Patricia had researched animal control policies, learned that multiple dangerous dog reports trigger mandatory investigation and potential removal, and filed false reports to exploit the system. She'd tried to have my service dog killed because she thinks PTSD treatment is weakness. Animal control investigation uncovered Patricia's methodical campaign. She'd filed 5 separate reports over 2 months, each describing fabricated attacks with enough detail to sound credible. She'd researched witness statement templates, learned animal control terminology, and created convincing false narratives. Digital forensics revealed disturbing search history. How many bite reports before dog removed? Dangerous dog euthanasia criteria. Can service dog be taken away for aggression? And how to report aggressive service animal. She'd planned Ranger's removal and potential death. Text messages to her daughter showed her reasoning. He's too dependent on that dog. If the dog is gone, he'll have to learn real coping mechanisms instead of relying on an animal. Animal control officer testified about the harm. False dangerous dog reports waste investigative resources and damage reputations of well-behaved animals. This defendant filed 5 detailed false reports specifically targeting a service dog, potentially putting disabled person's medical treatment at risk. My therapist provided testimony. Patient has severe PTSD from military service. Service dog is prescribed medical intervention providing critical support. Removing the dog would constitute removing prescribed medical treatment. Veterans advocacy groups joined the case. Service dogs are protected under ADA. Defendants' campaign to have service dog removed through false reports is disability discrimination and interference with medical care. Patricia's defense was stunning. She claimed she genuinely believed Ranger was dangerous because I'm too attached to him. Prosecutor destroyed this with evidence showing she'd never witnessed any aggressive behavior. She'd fabricated every incident. Evidence included timestamps proving Ranger wasn't present at any alleged attack location, security footage contradicting her reports, and veterinary behavioral assessments showing Ranger had no aggression history. Judge reviewed service dog certification, training records, and behavioral evaluations. This is a professionally trained service animal with documented temperament testing. Defendant filed false reports targeting medical equipment. Charged with filing false police reports, fraud, animal abuse, false accusations, disability discrimination, and conspiracy to interfere with medical treatment. Trial revealed the full extent of Patricia's interference beyond the false reports. She'd also contacted my employer anonymously claiming Ranger was unsuitable for workplace environment and suggesting I was using disability status inappropriately. HR records showed anonymous complaints about my service dog, all traced back to Patricia's email accounts. She'd created fake email addresses to file workplace complaints while simultaneously filing false, dangerous dog reports. Prosecutor presented comprehensive evidence. Defendant executed multi-front campaign to remove victim's service dog. False, dangerous dog reports to animal control. Anonymous workplace complaints to employer. Harassment of victim's therapist questioning medical necessity. All designed to separate disabled veteran from prescribed medical assistance. Evidence of email to my therapist claiming to be concerned family member, questioning whether service dog was really necessary or if I was just avoiding therapy. Therapist had documented the inappropriate contact. Veterans' disability rights organizations testified about pattern of interference. Defendant targeted every aspect of victim's service dog access. Legal status through false animal control reports, workplace accommodation through anonymous complaints, and medical prescription through therapist harassment. Service dog trainer who'd worked with Ranger testified about his temperament. This dog underwent 18 months professional training, passed all temperament tests, has perfect behavioral record. The reports were clearly fabricated. This dog doesn't have aggressive bone in his body. Medical expert testimony about PTSD treatment. Service dogs are evidence-based intervention for PTSD. Defendant's attempts to remove prescribed medical treatment could have triggered mental health crisis. Judge's verdict was harsh. You didn't just file false reports. You waged systematic campaign against disabled veterans' medical treatment because you personally disagree with service dog therapy. You weaponized animal control and workplace systems to attack medical care. Convicted all counts. Sentenced to 3 years prison, probation, restitution for investigation costs and legal fees, mandatory disability awareness training, and permanent restraining order from me and Ranger. Additionally banned from filing any animal control reports for 10 years and required to issue public apology to service dog community. Ranger remains my service dog. Perfect behavioral record maintained, still helping me manage PTSD daily. Patricia wanted him gone because she thought I was too dependent. She's imprisoned for trying to remove medical treatment. 3 years she's serving. 5 false reports she filed. 18 months Ranger trained to become my service dog. Numbers that tell the story. Aunt imprisoned. Service dog protected. Medical treatment preserved. Ranger still working. Still helping. Still essential to my mental health. Everything she tried to take. Everything that remains despite her interference. Service dog safe. Legal protections enforced. PTSD management continuing. She thought removing my dog would strengthen me. Prison time strengthened my resolve to protect medical rights instead. That's enough. Brother-in-law tampered with my rock climbing gear to cause accidents. Found out my brother-in-law had been weakening my climbing equipment for months, hoping I'd have a serious accident and quit the sport. I'm a competitive rock climber. My brother-in-law Derek resents the time his wife, my sister, spends supporting my competitions and training. Noticed my gear failing unusually. Carabiners that shouldn't break under normal loads were cracking. Rope showing wear patterns inconsistent with my climbing style. Harness stitching coming undone after only months of use. Took gear to professional inspection after a carabiner snapped during routine climb. Inspector found evidence of deliberate tampering, metal fatigue from repeated stress testing, acid etching on carabiners, partial cuts in rope fibers, and loosened harness stitching. Someone had been systematically weakening my safety equipment. The inspector said continued use could have resulted in fatal fall. Installed hidden camera in my garage where I store climbing gear. Caught Derek entering through side door, he has key for emergencies, spending 20 minutes with my equipment. Bending carabiners repeatedly to create metal fatigue, applying chemical solution to rope, partially cutting harness stitching. He did this twice weekly for 3 months. 12 separate instances of sabotaging safety equipment. Confronted him with footage. He admitted it casually. Said I was selfish for spending weekends climbing instead of family activities. My sister attended my competitions, and Derek resented her wasting time on your hobby. His solution? Sabotage my gear so I'd have accidents and quit climbing. Not minor accidents, he was trying to cause falls that would injure me seriously enough to end my climbing career. Reported to police immediately. Attempted murder. Destruction of safety equipment. He'd been trying to kill me for months. Police investigation revealed Derek had researched climbing accidents extensively. Browser history showed searches for climbing equipment failure deaths, how carabiners break, rope cutting methods undetectable, and climbing accident statistics. He'd studied how to sabotage gear in ways that would appear accidental. The chemical solution he applied to my rope was designed to weaken fibers gradually. Climbers would notice obviously cut rope, but chemically degraded rope would seem like normal wear. Climbing equipment expert testified about the danger. Defendant's tampering created time bombs. Victim was using equipment that could fail catastrophically during any climb. Multiple pieces of sabotaged gear meant multiple potential failure points. The likelihood of serious injury or death was extremely high. Evidence showed Derek had purchased climbing gear specifically to practice sabotage methods. He'd bought carabiners, tested different ways to weaken them, documented which methods left least obvious traces. He'd researched rope construction to learn where to make partial cuts that wouldn't be immediately visible. Text messages to friend revealed his mindset. If she breaks a leg or worse, maybe she'll quit climbing, and my wife will stop wasting weekends at competitions. Just need the gear to fail at the right time. He wasn't trying to cause minor injury. He was waiting for catastrophic failure during actual climb, where fall could be fatal. My sister was devastated. She'd trusted Derek around my gear, never imagining he was methodically sabotaging it. She testified against him, describing how he'd encouraged her to attend my competitions while secretly ensuring I was climbing with compromised equipment. Climbing community was horrified. Climbing depends on trust, in your equipment, your belay partner, your safety systems. And Vinden violated that fundamental trust by turning safety equipment into weapons. Detective testified about premeditation. Defendant researched climbing accidents for months. He purchased equipment to practice sabotage. He accessed victim's garage repeatedly to tamper with gear. He documented his methods. This was systematic attempted murder. Derek's defense claimed he just wanted to scare me into quitting. Prosecutors showed this was impossible. You can't scare someone into quitting by sabotaging equipment they trust with their life. Trial included dramatic demonstrations. Climbing safety expert showed jury how compromised carabiners could snap under bodyweight load, demonstrated how chemically weakened rope would appear normal but fail during fall, explained how loosened harness stitching could cause catastrophic failure. Prosecutor: defendant spent 3 months turning victims' safety equipment into instruments of potential death. He researched, practiced, and executed systematic sabotage. He waited for victim to climb with compromised gear, hoping for accident serious enough to end climbing career or life. Security footage showed 12 tampering sessions. Each time Derek entering garage, methodically working through equipment, testing carabiners for weakness, applying chemicals to rope, checking harness stitching. 20 minutes each session, ensuring maximum damage. Evidence of notebook found at Derek's house documenting sabotage. Dates, equipment targeted, methods used, wear patterns observed. He'd been tracking the degradation like a scientist monitoring an experiment. My testimony focused on trust violation. I trusted my gear. Every climber does. We stake our lives on equipment integrity. My brother-in-law systematically destroyed that trust by weaponizing my safety equipment. Climbing gym where I trained provided testimony about my skill level. Experienced climber with excellent safety record. The gear failures we witnessed were inconsistent with proper equipment maintenance and normal wear. Learning they were deliberate sabotage explains the anomalies. Sister's testimony was devastating. I encouraged my sister's climbing. I attended competitions. My husband tried to kill her because he resented my support of her sport. I brought him into her life, gave him access to her home. He used that access to turn her equipment into death traps. Judge was unequivocal. You researched methods to cause fatal climbing accidents. You practiced sabotage techniques. You repeatedly accessed victims' equipment with intent to cause serious bodily harm or death. This is attempted murder through equipment tampering. Convicted on attempted murder, destruction of safety equipment, criminal mischief, and conspiracy. Sentenced to 15 years prison, lifetime restraining order, and restitution for all replaced climbing gear. Climbing community donated replacement equipment. Every piece professionally inspected before use. I've returned to competition climbing, but had to rebuild trust in gear after months of using sabotaged equipment. Sister divorced Derek. She couldn't remain married to someone who'd tried to kill her sister because he resented her attending climbing competitions. Derek wanted me to quit climbing by causing accidents. He's imprisoned for 15 years. I'm still climbing competitively. 15 years he's serving. 12 tampering sessions documented. 3 months he sabotaged my gear. Numbers that tell the story. Brother-in-law imprisoned. Climbing gear replaced and secured. Sport continuing despite his murder attempts. Still competing. Still winning. Still alive despite his sabotage. Everything he tried to destroy. Everything that survived his tampering. Equipment secured. Trust rebuilt. Climbing career thriving. He weaponized safety gear. Got 15 years for attempted murder instead. That's enough. They laughed when I was cut out of the inheritance. Now I own their childhood home. I, 28, sat in that lawyer's office 6 months ago watching my stepmother, Linda, 52, and my half-siblings Marcus, 24, and Ashley, 22, exchange these satisfied little smirks while the attorney read through my father's will. My dad had passed 2 weeks earlier from a heart attack, and I was still processing the grief when I heard the words that made my blood run cold. The entirety of the estate, including the family business, the primary residence, and all financial assets, are to be divided equally between Linda Harrison, Marcus Harrison, and Ashley Harrison. My name wasn't mentioned once. Linda actually smiled at me across the table, not even trying to hide it. Marcus was scrolling through his phone like this was just another Tuesday. Ashley at least had the decency to look away, but she didn't say anything. I need to explain how we got here. My mom died when I was 7. Dad remarried Linda when I was 10, and she came with Marcus and Ashley. Growing up, it was fine at first. Not warm, but fine. But as the years went on, Linda made it clear that her kids were the priority. Dad's attention slowly shifted to them. By the time I graduated college, I felt like a guest in my own childhood home. Still, Dad and I had an okay relationship. We'd meet for lunch every few weeks. He'd ask about my job, I'd ask about the business. Nothing deep, but it was something. That's why this blindsided me. Back in that office, I asked the lawyer if there was a mistake. He looked uncomfortable and slid a document across the table. This will was updated 3 months before your father's passing. Everything appears to be in order. 3 months. That was right after Dad's cancer scare. Turned out to be nothing, but it shook him up. Linda must have pounced on that fear. I left that office in a daze. Outside in the parking lot, I heard Ashley call my name. I turned around, hoping maybe she'd apologize or explain. Instead, she said, "Mom's been really good to Dad all these years. She deserves this." That's when it clicked. They'd planned this. Linda had been working on this for months, maybe years. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I went home, opened my laptop, and started digging. The first thing I did was request a copy of Dad's previous will, the one from 8 years ago that I knew named me as primary heir. Then I hired an attorney, someone with zero connection to Linda's circle. Her name was Patricia Chen, and she had a reputation for being ruthless in probate cases. Patricia looked at both wills side by side and pointed out something immediately. The signatures don't match. Look at the H in Harrison. Your father always looped it twice. This one only loops once. We went deeper. The notary stamp was from a guy who turned out to be Linda's friend's cousin. When Patricia contacted him, he got nervous and admitted he might not have been present when the document was signed. The 2 witnesses listed? One was Linda's sister. The other was their housekeeper who, conveniently, had moved back to the Philippines right after Dad died. But here's the thing. I didn't tell anyone what I'd found. Not my friends, not my extended family, nobody. Linda kept posting on Facebook about finally being able to grieve in the home she built with her beloved husband. Marcus started driving Dad's vintage Corvette around town. Ashley was already planning renovations to the house. I let them get comfortable. I let them think they'd won. 4 months after Dad's death, Patricia filed a motion to contest the will. The court date was set for 2 months later. Linda's lawyer tried to get it dismissed, calling it a grief-stricken son's desperate attempt. That quote actually made it into the local paper. The day of the hearing, I showed up in one of Dad's old suits. Linda was dressed like she was going to a country club, confident as ever. Her lawyer kept patting her hand reassuringly. Our case was straightforward. Patricia presented the handwriting analysis, the testimony from the sketchy notary, and the fact that one witness had conveniently disappeared, while the other was a direct relative. She also brought up that Dad had been on heavy pain medication during the period the new will was supposedly signed, medication that could affect cognitive function. Linda's lawyer tried to argue that Dad was of sound mind and that I'd been estranged from the family. I watched Marcus lean over and whisper something to Ashley. They both looked confident. Then the judge started asking questions. Why wasn't the will filed with Dad's attorney of 20 years? Why did he suddenly use Linda's friend's cousin as a notary instead of his usual legal team? Where was the original document? Why did only copies exist? Linda's lawyer started stammering. The judge called a 15-minute recess. When we came back, I could see it in Linda's face. The confidence was gone. Her lawyer was sweating. The judge spoke for 10 minutes about the legal requirements for a valid will, about the importance of proper witnesses and notarization, about how the court takes fraud very seriously. Then he invalidated the new will and reinstated Dad's previous one. Linda actually gasped. Marcus's face went red. Ashley started crying. According to Dad's real will, I inherited 60% of everything. The remaining 40% was split between a few charities and a small trust for Marcus and Ashley. Dad wasn't cruel. He still provided for them. But the house, the business, and the bulk of the assets were mine. Linda and her kids had 30 days to vacate the house. My house. The one I grew up in before she redecorated it and pretended it was always hers. I hired movers to help them pack. I wasn't heartless, but I wasn't going to extend the deadline either. Linda tried to call me twice during those 30 days. I didn't answer. Her lawyer sent mine a letter asking if we could work out a compromise. Patricia responded with a polite decline. Moving day came. I showed up at 9 a.m. with my own moving truck. Most of their stuff was already gone, but Linda was still there, supervising the last boxes. We didn't speak. She just stared at me like I was a stranger, then left without a word. Marcus and Ashley unfriended me on social media. Some of Dad's old friends reached out, confused about what had happened. I explained it once, then stopped bothering. People were going to believe what they wanted to believe. That was 3 months ago. I've been living in the house since then, slowly making it mine again. I found some of my mom's old things in the attic that Linda had boxed up. I hung them back on the walls. Last week, I was working in the front yard when Linda drove by. She slowed down, just staring at the house. I was holding a rake, covered in leaves. I lifted one hand and waved. She didn't wave back. She just drove off. The business is doing well. I promoted Dad's longtime manager to COO since I'm still learning the ropes. Some of Linda's friends won't work with me anymore, but that's fine. Dad built something solid, and I'm going to keep it that way. I still think about Dad sometimes, wondering if he knew what Linda was doing. Part of me hopes he didn't, that she really did manipulate him when he was vulnerable. The other part wonders if he suspected, but was too tired to fight. I'll never know. Ashley sent me a text 2 weeks ago. Just one line. I'm sorry. I haven't responded yet. I don't know if I will. So here's my question. Do I owe them anything? Marcus and Ashley got their trust fund. They're not destitute. But they're still my half-siblings, even if we were never really close. Part of me wants to just cut them off completely and move on. Another part thinks about what Dad might have wanted. What would you do? How I made my uncle regret stealing my late father's business. I, 21, lost my father 6 months ago to a sudden heart attack. His auto repair shop, the one I'd been working at since I was 16, was supposed to be mine. My uncle Mark, 48, had other plans. He's my dad's younger brother who never worked a day in the business. His son Derek, 23, didn't know the difference between a wrench and a socket set. I need to give some context here. Dad and I worked side by side for 5 years. He taught me everything: how to diagnose problems by sound, how to talk to customers, how to keep the books clean. It was a small shop, but we had loyal customers who trusted us. Dad told me dozens of times that when he retired, the place would be mine. Nothing in writing, though. That was his mistake. Uncle Mark always resented Dad's success. He bounced between jobs his whole life: sales gigs that never worked out, a failed restaurant, some MLM schemes. Meanwhile, Dad built something real. You could feel the jealousy at family dinners. Mom, who's 52, saw it too, but Dad always defended his little brother. Then Dad died. Heart attack at 54, completely unexpected. I was destroyed. We all were. Mom couldn't even get out of bed for weeks. A week after the funeral, Uncle Mark showed up at the shop with papers. Said Dad had left the business to him as family property, and that it needed to stay in the family with someone mature enough to run it. He had documents that looked official: transfer papers, some kind of will amendment. Mom was too deep in grief to question anything. I was 21, broke, and had no idea how to fight this legally. He took over immediately. 3 days later, he fired me. Told me I was too inexperienced to work there anymore. Hired Derek to manage the place instead. Derek, who couldn't even change his own oil. The worst part was the family gathering 2 weeks after that. Uncle Mark was drinking, getting loud, talking about how he was going to modernize the business. Then he looked right at me and said, "I'd never amount to anything without my daddy holding my hand." People laughed. I left. I watched from a distance as he started running the place into the ground. Old customers called me asking what happened, why I wasn't there anymore. Derek was screwing up jobs left and right. Uncle Mark sold off some of Dad's custom tools that had been in our family for decades, just to pocket the cash. 3 months of this. 3 months of watching him destroy what Dad built. 3 months of being broke and angry and feeling completely powerless. Then I remembered something. Dad had shown me everything. Every supplier contact was in my head. Every customer's service history. The custom scheduling system we'd developed for fleet maintenance. The relationships with parts distributors. Uncle Mark had the building and the equipment, but I had Dad's actual knowledge. That's when I decided. I was going to open my own shop, and I was going to take everything back. I found a location 2 towns over, far enough that Uncle Mark wouldn't immediately connect it to me, close enough that Dad's old customers could still reach me. I scraped together my savings and got a small business loan, named it something completely different but ran it exactly how Dad taught me. Honest work, fair prices, treat people right. I hired 2 mechanics Dad had trained years ago. They'd left Uncle Mark's shop after he cut their pay. They knew the system. We offered quality service, and I undercut Uncle Mark's prices by about 20%. Then, I started calling customers. The ones who'd been coming to Dad for 10, 15 years. I kept it simple. "Hi, this is me. You probably remember me from working with my dad. I've opened my own place and I'd love to earn your business." I didn't badmouth Uncle Mark. Didn't have to. These people had already noticed the drop in quality. The first major win was the delivery company. 8 trucks that needed regular maintenance. Dad had developed a custom tracking system for them, detailed records of every service, every part replaced. Uncle Mark didn't even know those records existed. I had them all. The fleet manager switched over immediately. After that, word spread fast. 3 months in, I had a steady flow of customers. A lot of them were coming from Uncle Mark's shop. They'd tell me stories about Derek forgetting to order parts or Uncle Mark trying to upsell them on services they didn't need. 6 months in, I'd taken about half of his customer base. My shop was profitable. His was drowning. That's when Uncle Mark figured out who owned the competing shop. He called me screaming about how I was destroying the family, how I was ungrateful, how Dad would be ashamed of me. I told him Dad would be ashamed of someone who stole from his dead brother. He threatened to sue me. Empty threat from a guy who couldn't pay his existing bills. Around the same time, Derek quit. Apparently he and Uncle Mark had a huge fight about the business failing. Derek wasn't an idiot. He could see the writing on the wall. 1 year after I opened, Uncle Mark's shop was losing money every month. Equipment was breaking down, and he couldn't afford to fix it. Creditors were calling constantly. He tried slashing prices even more, but that just made things worse. The few customers he had left started going elsewhere because the quality had gotten so bad. I heard through family members that he was desperate, drinking heavily, blaming everyone but himself. He'd burned through whatever cash Dad had left in the business accounts. Then the audit happened. Some of his desperate financial moves triggered a tax audit. When investigators started digging into the business records, they found the forged documents, the ones he'd used to steal the shop from me. The penalties were severe. Fraud isn't something you just walk away from. He was forced to liquidate assets to pay the fines. That meant selling the shop. Uncle Mark put the shop up for sale. The building, the equipment, everything. He was getting lowball offers because everyone in town knew the business was failing. The reputation was trashed. I made an offer through my lawyer. Kept it anonymous at first. Uncle Mark was desperate enough that he accepted pretty quickly. He needed the money to cover the penalties and his debts. The closing happened on a Wednesday. That's when he found out the buyer was me. I'll never forget the look on his face when my lawyer revealed it. He tried to back out, but the contract was signed. The shop was mine. I renamed it back to Dad's original name, merged the operations between both locations, hired back the employees Uncle Mark had fired over the past year, slowly started restoring the original shop to what it used to be. Dad's tools that hadn't been sold were still there, covered in dust. Uncle Mark is completely out of business now. No shop, no income from it, reputation destroyed. I see him sometimes around town, working at a hardware store. He avoids eye contact. Derek doesn't talk to him much anymore from what I hear. Most of the family sided with me once the truth about the forged documents came out. He's never apologized. Not once. At a family birthday party a few months ago, he tried to make himself the victim, talking about how I'd systematically destroyed him. My cousin shut that down pretty fast by bringing up the fraud charges. It's been 18 months since I bought back Dad's original shop. Both locations are doing well. Better than they ever did, actually. I'm planning to open a third location next year. Mom is finally healing. She comes by sometimes, and I can see she's proud. She says Dad would be proud too. I have the forged documents framed in my office. My business partner thinks it's weird, but I like the reminder. Reminder of what Uncle Mark tried to do. Reminder of why I work as hard as I do. Sometimes I drive past the hardware store where Uncle Mark works. Sometimes he's outside on his break, and I see him watching my truck go by. There's always this look on his face, anger mixed with something else. Regret, maybe. I don't know. Mom asked me last week if I'd ever forgive him. She's been talking to her church group about forgiveness and family and all that. I told her I honestly don't know. Part of me feels like I already got my revenge. The business is mine, Dad's legacy is restored, and Uncle Mark lost everything. But another part of me is still angry. He stole from his dead brother. He tried to destroy me when I was grieving and vulnerable. He called me worthless. Some family members think I went too far, that I should have just let it go and moved on, that what I did was calculated and cold. Maybe they're right. I don't really care. I got back what was mine. That's all that matters. Guess who controlled Grandma's will? Not the Golden children anymore. I, 32, have been dealing with my Aunt Carol, 58, and Uncle Richard, 55, for the past 2 years. They're my dad's siblings, and they've always been the type to show up only when there's something in it for them. My dad passed away when I was 19, and after that, I became really close with my grandma. She practically raised me after we lost him. About 2 years ago, Grandma started showing signs of dementia. Nothing major at first. She'd forget where she put her keys or repeat the same story twice in one conversation. But it was enough that we all noticed. My mom, my younger brother Jake, who's 28, and I started taking turns checking on her more often. We'd bring groceries, help with bills, just making sure she was okay. That's when Carol and Richard suddenly remembered they had a mother. They showed up at Grandma's house one weekend unannounced. I was there helping her organize her medications when they walked in like they owned the place. Carol immediately started commenting on how overwhelmed Grandma looked, how she shouldn't have to deal with so much stress. Richard chimed in about how we were probably pressuring her about finances. I was stunned. These two hadn't visited Grandma in over a year, and now they were acting like concerned children. but Grandma seemed happy to see them, so I didn't say anything. I should have. Within 2 weeks, they'd moved her into a facility without consulting anyone else in the family. They claimed it was closer to them so they could provide proper care. When I tried to visit, the staff said I wasn't on the approved visitors list. Carol had made sure of that. I called Grandma's phone and Carol answered. She told me Grandma was resting and that I was causing unnecessary stress by trying to force visits. She actually said the family had been poisoning Grandma's mind against them for years, making her think they only came around for money. Then she said they were protecting her from people like me who just saw dollar signs. The irony wasn't lost on me. My brother and I tried everything. We called the facility. We reached out to Grandma's friends from church. We even contacted her longtime attorney, Mr. Harrison. He seemed uncomfortable when we spoke, said he couldn't discuss his client's affairs, but he did mention that Grandma had been in to update some documents recently. That's when I knew something was wrong. 3 months went by, 3 months of being blocked from seeing my own grandmother. Then one night, I got a call from Mrs. Patterson, one of Grandma's neighbors. She'd managed to visit Grandma at the facility because apparently Carol hadn't thought to block the church ladies. Mrs. Patterson whispered into the phone like she was afraid of being overheard. She said Grandma had mentioned changing her will, that Carol and Richard had been talking to her about how the rest of us only wanted her money and that she should protect her assets from greedy family members. I felt sick. 2 weeks later, Grandma passed away. Pneumonia, they said. Carol called to inform us, her voice dripping with fake sadness. The funeral was small. Carol and Richard sat in the front row like grieving saints. I sat in the back with my brother and Mom, feeling like strangers at our own grandmother's funeral. The will reading was scheduled for the following week. Carol kept smiling at me during the funeral reception, this knowing, smug smile that made my blood boil. Richard posted on Facebook about losing the family matriarch and how they'd been blessed to care for her in her final days. I wanted to punch him. That smile Carol had, though, it stuck with me. She thought she'd won. They both did. The day of the will reading, Carol and Richard showed up dressed like they were attending a business meeting. Carol had already started wearing some of Grandma's jewelry. I recognized the pearl necklace Grandma wore every Sunday to church. Richard carried a leather folder, probably to take notes on all the assets they thought they were about to inherit. Mr. Harrison looked tired. He'd been Grandma's attorney for over 30 years, and I could tell this whole situation had worn on him. He asked us all to sit down, and then he dropped the bomb. The will Carol and Richard had convinced Grandma to sign, the one that left everything to them, had been superseded. 3 weeks before Grandma died, she'd filed a final amendment. Alone, without Carol or Richard present. Carol's face went white. Richard actually stood up from his chair. Mr. Harrison continued reading. Grandma had appointed me as the executor of her estate and granted me full discretionary power to divide assets as I saw fit among the family. Not equally. Not according to any formula. However I decided was fair. The room erupted. Carol started screaming about how this was illegal, how I must have manipulated Grandma, how she was going to contest this obvious fraud. Richard was on his phone, presumably calling a lawyer. My brother looked shocked. My mom started crying. Mr. Harrison calmly explained that he had detailed documentation of his final meeting with Grandma, including a video recording where she explicitly stated she was of sound mind and was making this decision without any coercion. She'd apparently told him that Carol and Richard had shown their true colors, and that she trusted me to do what was right with her legacy. Carol and Richard did contest the will. They hired an expensive lawyer and dragged the process out for 8 months. During that time, they threw a party at Grandma's house, which they'd been staying in, claiming they had a right to be there as caretakers. They posted photos all over social media, wearing Grandma's jewelry, posing with her antique furniture like they'd won some kind of prize. Carol posted a photo of herself in Grandma's vintage fur coat with the caption about how Grandma's treasures were with the family who actually cared. That post got screenshot and saved real quick. The court finally ruled in my favor. The judge wasn't gentle about it either. She said the evidence clearly showed Grandma had been isolated and manipulated, but that her final amendment demonstrated she'd recognized what was happening and taken steps to correct it. The judge ordered that all legal fees, and they were substantial after 8 months of litigation, be deducted from whatever inheritance Carol and Richard were entitled to receive. That's when I got to work. I spent 2 months going through Grandma's belongings and reading through old letters and journals I found in her bedroom. She'd written a lot about the women's shelter she volunteered at for 20 years, how important it was to her, how she wished she could do more for the women there who were rebuilding their lives. She'd also written about her church, how the community had supported her after Grandpa died, how she wished the old building could be restored to its former glory. I knew exactly what to do. The jewelry, every piece Carol had been flaunting online, went to the women's shelter. They held a fundraising auction, and those pieces raised over $40,000. The antique furniture, the collectibles, the vintage items Richard had been photographing like trophies, sold. Every penny went into a fund for the church restoration project. They put a plaque in the new community room with Grandma's name on it. I made sure my brother and Mom were taken care of. The house went to my mom, who'd always loved it. Grandma's savings were split between Jake and me for our kids' education funds. Her photo albums, personal letters, and the handmade quilt from her mother went to us. The things that actually mattered. As for Carol and Richard, after the legal fees were deducted from their portion, there wasn't much left. I gave them exactly what I found that Grandma had specifically labeled for them in her basement. A dusty cardboard box filled with old newspapers from the 1970s that she'd apparently been saving for some reason. No note, no explanation. Just newspapers. Carol called me the day she opened the box. She was screaming so loud I had to hold the phone away from my ear. She called me every name in the book, threatened to sue me again, said I'd stolen her inheritance and destroyed her mother's legacy. When she finally stopped to breathe, I said that Grandma always believed you should get exactly what you give. Then I hung up. Richard sent a few threatening emails that my lawyer advised me to keep for documentation but not respond to. Eventually, they both went quiet. I heard through the family grapevine that they're trying to salvage their reputations, telling anyone who'll listen that I manipulated Grandma and stole their inheritance. The funny thing is, most of Grandma's friends were at the church restoration dedication. They saw the plaque. They knew where the money came from. And they remembered who visited Grandma every week before Carol and Richard showed up, and who isolated her afterward. Sometimes I wonder if I should have given them more, maybe some of the smaller items, photos, something with sentimental value. Then I remember Carol wearing Grandma's pearls at the funeral reception, smiling that smug smile. And I don't feel bad anymore. My mom asked me last week if I thought Grandma would be proud of how I handled everything. Honestly, I think she knew exactly what she was doing when she made me executor. She could have left detailed instructions, but she didn't. She trusted me to figure out what mattered. The women's shelter sent me a letter last month. One of the residents bought a necklace from the auction, said it made her feel beautiful for the first time in years. The church youth group now has a space for after-school programs because of the renovations. Carol and Richard have a box of old newspapers. My brother called me yesterday. He said Carol showed up at his work trying to convince him to help her sue me again. She told him I'd manipulated the whole situation, and that if he testified on her behalf, she'd split whatever she recovered with him. Jake told her to leave or he'd call security. She left, but not before telling him he was making a huge mistake, and that family should stick together. The audacity of that woman never ceases to amaze me. I've been sleeping better lately. For a while after Grandma died, I kept having these dreams where she was trying to tell me something, but I couldn't hear her. Now those dreams have stopped. Maybe that means I did the right thing. Or maybe I'm just finally at peace with my decisions. Richard blocked me on all social media last week. Carol had already blocked me months ago. Fine by me. I don't need to see their pity party posts about how their ungrateful nephew destroyed their lives. The people who matter know the truth. The church is planning a dedication ceremony next month for the completed renovations. They invited me to say a few words about Grandma. I'm not great at public speaking, but I think I'll do it. She deserves to be remembered for who she really was. Not the confused old woman Carol and Richard tried to manipulate, but the strong, generous person who spent her life helping others. I wonder if Carol and Richard will show up. Part of me hopes they do. I want them to see exactly where Grandma's legacy ended up. I want them to see the faces of the people she actually cared about benefiting from her generosity. But honestly, they probably won't come. They never cared about the things that mattered to Grandma anyway. When my family mocked me for being useless, I turned my startup into their worst humiliation. I'm 30 now, and for most of my life, I was the family joke. My older brother Nathan is 34 and became a cardiologist. My older sister Rebecca is 32 and made partner at a corporate law firm by the time she was 29. Then there was me, the youngest, who decided to study graphic design at a state school instead of pursuing medicine or law like my parents wanted. My parents, both in their early 60s now, never let me forget that I was the disappointment. Family dinners were torture. My dad would talk about Nathan's latest publication in some medical journal or Rebecca's big case win, and then he'd turn to me and ask how my little art projects were going. My mom would sigh and say she hoped I'd figure out something stable eventually, because design wasn't a real career. When I was 24 and fresh out of college, I started working at a small design agency making $35,000 a year. I was doing branding and web design for local businesses, and I actually loved it. But at family gatherings, when people asked what I did, my parents would sort of mumble through an explanation and quickly change the subject to Nathan's research or Rebecca's courtroom victories. I started my company when I was 24, just a year out of college. It wasn't anything huge at first, just me and my college roommate Jake working out of my apartment. We'd noticed that small businesses were struggling with their online presence, but couldn't afford traditional design agencies. We created a platform that used templates, but allowed for customization, basically democratizing good design for businesses that couldn't drop $10,000 on branding. When I told my family about it at Thanksgiving that year, the response was brutal. My dad literally laughed and said it sounded like I was going to sell t-shirts to my friends. Rebecca asked if I was going to be one of those people who calls themselves an entrepreneur when they're really just unemployed. Nathan didn't say much, but I could see the pity in his eyes. My mom patted my hand and said it was cute that I had hobbies, but maybe I should think about grad school or getting a real job with benefits. I stopped talking about my work at family events after that. When they asked how things were going, I'd just say fine and change the subject. Meanwhile, Jake and I were grinding 16-hour days. We'd built out our platform, started getting clients through word of mouth and online marketing, and were actually making money. Not a lot at first, but we were growing. By the time I was 26, we had 15 employees and had raised a small seed round of funding. We were doing maybe $2 million in annual revenue. My family had no idea. At Christmas that year, my dad asked if I was still doing my design thing and seemed surprised when I said yes. He told me there was no shame in admitting something didn't work out and getting a regular job. I just nodded and ate my turkey. The company kept growing. We expanded our services, added new features, and started landing bigger clients. By the time I was 28, we had 70 employees and were doing $15 million in revenue. We'd become one of the go-to platforms for small business branding and design. Tech publications were writing about us. We were getting acquisition interest from larger companies. My family still had no clue. I'd moved to a nice apartment in the city, drove a decent car, but nothing flashy. I didn't post about work on social media. As far as they knew, I was still doing freelance design or whatever they'd decided I was doing. When I was 29, we got a serious acquisition offer from a major tech company. They wanted our platform, our team, and our user base. The offer was $43 million. Jake and I owned about 60% of the company between us after the funding rounds, which meant I personally stood to make about $13 million after taxes. The negotiation took 3 months. We finally closed the deal 2 weeks before Christmas. I was suddenly worth more money than I'd ever imagined, and my family had no idea any of this had happened. I decided to go to Christmas dinner that year and just see what happened. The dinner was at my parents' house like always. Nathan was talking about a complex surgery he'd performed. Rebecca was talking about making partner and her salary increase. My dad was beaming at both of them. When the attention finally turned to me, my mom asked if I was seeing anyone, because maybe it was time to think about settling down since my career situation was so uncertain. I told them I'd had a pretty good year, actually. My dad asked if I'd gotten a promotion at whatever design place I was working at. I said, not exactly, but my company had been acquired. There was a confused silence. Rebecca asked what I meant by my company. I explained that I'd started a design platform company 6 years ago, and we'd just been bought out. Nathan asked how much, like it was some joke. I told him the acquisition price. The table went completely silent. My dad actually dropped his fork. My mom asked me to repeat the number. When I did, Rebecca said there was no way that was real. I pulled up the press release on my phone and showed them. There it was. Official announcement from the acquiring company with my name listed as co-founder and my quote about being excited for the next chapter. The rest of dinner was awkward. My parents kept asking questions about how this had happened and why I'd never told them. I said I had tried to tell them, but they'd called it cute and suggested I get a real job. My dad got defensive and said they'd just been concerned about my future. Rebecca looked like she'd swallowed something bitter. Nathan was the only one who seemed genuinely happy for me and asked real questions about the business. After that dinner, everything changed. Suddenly, my parents wanted to have lunch with me to hear all about my success story. Rebecca asked if I needed a lawyer to help manage my wealth. Nathan asked if I wanted to invest in a medical device startup his colleague was launching. Everyone was so interested in my life and my opinions. Then my dad called me about 2 months after Christmas. He asked if we could meet for coffee to discuss something important. When we met, he told me his commercial real estate business was struggling. He'd over-leveraged during the expansion and now had significant debts that were coming due. He owed about $800,000 to various creditors, and the bank was threatening to call his loans. He asked if I could help him out as a gesture of gratitude for everything he'd done for me growing up. I asked him what exactly he'd done for me. He seemed taken aback. He said he'd raised me and supported me and given me a good education. I pointed out that I'd paid for most of my own college through scholarships and part-time jobs, and that he'd spent the last 6 years telling me I was wasting my life. He said that wasn't fair, and that parents sometimes push their kids because they want the best for them. I told him I'd think about it. Then I did something he didn't expect. I looked into his business debts. I contacted his creditors through my lawyer and made offers to buy out his loans at a discount. Most of them were happy to get paid something rather than risk default. Within a month, I owned about $750,000 of my father's business debt. When you own someone's debt, you own leverage over their business. My father's company was structured in a way that the debt holders could force certain business decisions if the debts weren't paid. I had my lawyer send him a formal notice that I now held his loans and we needed to discuss restructuring. My dad called me furious. He said I'd betrayed him and gone behind his back. I told him I was just being a good businessman, the kind of businessman he'd always told me I could never be. He said I was being vindictive and cruel. I said I was being practical, and that if he couldn't pay his debts, there would be consequences. I gave him two options. He could pay back the full amount within 90 days, which we both knew he couldn't do. Or he could accept my restructuring proposal. The proposal was simple. I would forgive the debt in exchange for majority ownership of his company and control of business operations. He would stay on as a consultant, but I would make all major decisions. He refused at first. He said he'd built that company over 30 years, and I had no right to take it from him. I pointed out that he'd built it into the ground and was about to lose it anyway. At least my way, he'd still have a role and wouldn't face bankruptcy. He hung up on me. 2 weeks later, his lawyer called my lawyer. My dad was accepting the terms. We drew up the papers, and he signed over majority control. I immediately brought in a management consultant to assess operations. Within a month, I'd restructured the entire company, cut unnecessary expenses, and renegotiated contracts. I also eliminated my father's position as CEO and moved him to a consultant role with a significant pay cut. My mother called me crying, asking how I could do this to my own father. I reminded her of every dinner where they'd mocked my career choice, every time they'd called my work cute or suggested I get a real job. She said I was supposed to be better than that success should make me generous, not petty. I told her I was being generous by not letting his company collapse completely and taking his house with it. Rebecca sent me a long email about family loyalty and how money was changing me. I didn't respond. Nathan called and said he understood why I was angry, but asked if this was really who I wanted to be. That one actually made me think for a while. The company I took over is now profitable again. I hired a real CEO to run it, and my dad works maybe 10 hours a week doing consulting on legacy accounts. He makes about a third of what he used to make. My parents had to downsize their house and adjust their lifestyle. They're not struggling, but they're not comfortable either. Family gatherings are tense now. My parents barely speak to me. Rebecca is cordial, but cold. Nathan still tries to maintain a relationship, but it's strained. Last Christmas, when my dad had to leave early from dinner at Rebecca's house, she made a comment about him having work in the morning. Everyone knew it was a dig at me. My mom sent me a card on my birthday last month with a note saying she hoped I was happy now that I'd proven my point. It stung more than I expected. I've been thinking a lot about whether I went too far. I could have just loaned him the money or helped him restructure without taking control. But something in me needed them to understand what it felt like to be dismissed and underestimated. The startup I built got acquired for millions, but the real victory was never about the money. It was about proving I wasn't the failure they'd decided I was. Buying my father's company and firing him probably makes me vindictive, maybe even cruel. But for 6 years they treated my dreams like a joke, and now the punchline is that their useless son owns their reality. My dad has to call me sir now when we have business meetings, per company protocol. My mom avoids looking at me at family events. Rebecca acts like I'm a stranger who happens to share her DNA. Nathan is the only one who still treats me like a brother, and even that's complicated. They used to call me a disappointment. Now they don't call me much at all. I won, I guess, but most days it doesn't feel like winning. It just feels empty. After my parents stole my college fund for my brother's wedding, I made sure they regretted it. I'm 30 now, but the moment that changed everything happened when I was 18. That's when my parents took the college fund I'd been counting on and gave it to my older brother Danny for his wedding. Danny is 34 now, and he's always been the golden child who could do no wrong. I was always the artsy one, the dreamer, the kid who didn't need as much attention or support because I'd figure things out somehow. My college fund had about $45,000 in it. My parents had been contributing since I was born, and I'd added to it with birthday money and summer job earnings throughout high school. I had scholarships that would cover about half my tuition at a decent state university, and the fund would cover the rest plus living expenses. I'd planned everything carefully because I knew I wanted to study graphic design and maybe minor in business. Then Danny got engaged to his girlfriend Melissa when I was a senior in high school. She wanted a wedding that belonged in a magazine. The venue alone was $20,000. She wanted a designer dress, a live band, an open bar for 200 guests, and a honeymoon in Italy. The total cost was going to be around $65,000. Danny was working in sales and making decent money, but not enough to pay for the wedding Melissa wanted. He asked my parents for help. 3 months before I was supposed to start college, my parents sat me down in the living room. My dad did most of the talking while my mom looked uncomfortable. He said Danny needed financial help with the wedding, and they'd decided to loan him money from my college fund. They said it was temporary, just a loan, and they'd pay it back within a year. They promised I wouldn't lose anything, and that this was what family did for each other. I asked how much they were loaning him. My dad said $40,000, almost my entire fund. I asked how I was supposed to pay for college. My mom finally spoke up and said I was the creative one, that I'd figure something out, that maybe I didn't even need college right away. She said Danny's wedding was a once-in-a-lifetime event, and I'd have other opportunities. I was furious, but I was also 18 and didn't know how to fight back. I told them I didn't agree with this. My dad said it wasn't up for discussion, that they were the account holders and had already made the decision. The money was already transferred. Danny's wedding was happening in 2 months, and I needed to be supportive because that's what families do. I went to Danny's wedding and smiled for the photos. I watched them get married at an expensive vineyard with ice sculptures and a 7-course meal. I watched Melissa in her $8,000 dress and listened to speeches about how generous my parents were. Nobody mentioned that my college fund had paid for the centerpieces and the champagne fountain. When August came and I was supposed to start school, I had about $5,000 left in my account and a partial scholarship. It wasn't enough. I deferred enrollment and told the university I'd start in January instead. My parents seemed relieved that I wasn't making a big deal about it. They said they'd start paying me back soon. They never did. Every time I brought it up over the next year, my dad would say money was tight, or that Danny was going through something and needed help getting established. My mom would change the subject. By the time January rolled around, I realized I was on my own. I moved out of my parents' house into a tiny apartment with 2 roommates. I worked 3 jobs, waiting tables during dinner shifts, doing freelance graphic design whenever I could find clients, and working weekend shifts at a retail store. I enrolled in community college, taking night classes because that's all I could afford and all my schedule allowed. The next 4 years were brutal. I worked constantly, slept maybe 5 hours a night, and took classes whenever I could fit them in. I transferred to a state university after 2 years at community college and continued working multiple jobs while taking night and online classes. I graduated when I was 23 with a degree in business and about $30,000 in student loans, because even working 3 jobs wasn't enough to cover everything. During those years, my parents would occasionally ask how school was going. They never offered to help financially. They never brought up the college fund again. Danny and Melissa had a baby, and my parents were over the moon about being grandparents. Family gatherings became showcases for Danny's growing family, while I was still grinding away trying to build a life. After graduation, I got a job at a financial planning firm as an assistant. I was good with numbers and good with people, and I learned quickly. I got my certifications and became a licensed financial advisor by the time I was 25. I specialized in helping young adults recover from financial setbacks and plan for their futures. The irony wasn't lost on me. I built a solid client base and got promoted twice. By the time I was 28, I was a senior advisor with my own office and was making good money. I'd paid off my student loans, had savings, and had invested wisely. I bought a condo and a reliable car. I was doing well, and I'd done it entirely on my own. Then Danny's business venture failed. He'd quit his sales job 2 years earlier to start some kind of consulting company that never really got off the ground. He'd burned through his savings and had borrowed money from my parents to keep it afloat. When it finally collapsed, he was in serious debt, and my parents had drained their retirement accounts helping him. My mom called me on a Tuesday afternoon. She said they needed to talk to me about something important and asked if I could come to dinner that weekend. I hadn't been to their house in almost a year. I'd kept my distance because every visit felt like being reminded that I wasn't the priority. At dinner, they laid it out. They had about $120,000 in debt between credit cards, a second mortgage they'd taken on the house, and personal loans. Their retirement accounts were nearly empty because they'd loaned Danny over $80,000 for his business. Danny couldn't pay them back because he was drowning in his own debt. They were both still working but barely making minimum payments. They were looking at bankruptcy or losing the house. My dad asked if I could help them figure out what to do. My mom said they knew I was good with finances now, and maybe I could give them advice. They looked desperate and old in a way I'd never seen before. I asked them if they remembered my college fund. There was an uncomfortable silence. My dad said that was a long time ago, and this was different. I asked how much they'd paid me back. My mom quietly said they hadn't been able to. I told them I'd help them. I saw the relief on their faces. Then I told them my conditions. I would manage their finances completely, make all the decisions about their spending and debt repayment, and they would follow my plan exactly. They looked uncertain, but desperate. My dad asked what the plan was. I said they'd find out once they signed the paperwork giving me financial power of attorney. They hesitated for a day. Then my mom called and said they'd do whatever I needed them to do. I drew up the papers through my firm and had them sign everything. I don't think they read most of it. They just trusted that I was helping them because I was family. Once I had control, I did a complete audit of their finances. It was worse than they'd told me. They had a vacation cabin they'd bought 5 years ago that was bleeding money in maintenance and property taxes. They had 2 car payments on vehicles they didn't need. They were spending about $4,000 a month on discretionary expenses while drowning in debt. I created a plan. First, I listed the vacation cabin for sale. My parents protested, saying it was their retirement dream. I reminded them they didn't have a retirement anymore because they'd given it to Danny. The cabin sold within 2 months. After paying off the loan on it, the proceeds gave us about $90,000 to put toward their debts. Next, I sold my dad's truck and my mom's SUV. I helped them buy 2 reliable used sedans with no car payments. They complained about driving older cars. I showed them the spreadsheet of how much they were paying in car loans and insurance. They stopped complaining. I put them on a strict budget. Groceries were $400 a month. Entertainment was $100. No eating out except once a month. No vacations. No helping Danny financially unless they wanted to derail the entire plan. Every extra dollar went to debt repayment. I set up automatic payments so they couldn't mess it up. My mom cried when she saw the budget. She said it felt like being punished. I told her it was called accountability. My dad said I was being harsh and that I didn't understand what it was like to be their age and facing this. I reminded him that I understood what it was like to be 18 and told I didn't need college while my fund paid for someone else's party. They stopped talking to me as much. Family gatherings became tense. Danny called me once and said I was being cruel to our parents, making them live like they were poor. I asked him when he was planning to pay them back the $80,000 he'd borrowed. He said that wasn't fair because his business failing wasn't his fault. I hung up on him. Over the next 2 years, I managed their finances ruthlessly. Every month I reviewed their spending. Any deviation from the budget had to be approved by me. I refinanced their mortgage to a lower rate and extended the term. I negotiated with credit card companies to lower interest rates. I sold items they didn't need on online marketplaces. Their vacation home furniture, my dad's golf clubs, my mom's jewelry collection that she never wore. The debt went from $120,000 to $70,000 in 18 months. They hated me for it, but the numbers worked. They started seeing hope that they might actually retire someday. My dad, begrudgingly, admitted I was good at what I did. My mom stopped calling to complain about the budget after the first year. Last month, they paid off the last credit card. They're down to just the mortgage now, and they're back on track for retirement in about 5 years if they stick to the plan. I'm gradually transferring financial control back to them, but I'm still monitoring everything. We had dinner last week, and my dad said he appreciated what I'd done even though it was hard. My mom said she was sorry they'd taken my college fund and never paid me back. She said she understood now why I'd been so strict with them. I told them I wasn't doing it to punish them, even though part of me had wanted to. I was doing it because someone had to teach them that choices have consequences. Danny still hasn't paid them back. He's working a regular job again and struggling with his own debt. My parents haven't loaned him any money in 2 years because I won't let them. He's barely speaking to me now because I'm the reason they won't help him anymore. People who know the story are divided on whether I did the right thing. Some say I was too harsh and that you should help family without conditions. Others say my parents needed someone to force them to face reality. I honestly don't know which side is right. What I do know is that my parents destroyed my college plans to fund a wedding that led to a marriage that's now struggling under financial strain. They enabled Danny his entire life and nearly destroyed their own future doing it. I could have just given them advice and let them figure it out. Instead, I took control and made them live through the kind of financial hardship I'd experienced because of their choices. They taught me that family helps family, but they only applied that lesson when it was convenient. So I taught them accountability, budgeting, and consequences. They didn't like the lesson, but they needed it. My college fund paid for champagne fountains and ice sculptures. Their retirement fund is paying for the education they never thought I deserved. Maybe that makes me vindictive, or maybe it just makes us even. How I made my narcissistic aunt lose the inheritance she stole from my dying grandmother. I'm 26, and this story starts when I was 23, right around the time my grandmother got her terminal diagnosis. She was 79 and had been the center of our family for as long as I could remember. My mom was 52 then, the younger of 2 daughters, and had always been close with Grandma. My Aunt Patricia, who's 58 now, was the older daughter and had always been Grandma's favorite, even though she'd barely visited over the years unless she needed something. Grandma had been living independently up until the diagnosis. Pancreatic cancer, stage 4, maybe 6 months if she was lucky. My mom immediately started going over every day to help her, taking time off work, cooking meals, managing medications, all of it. I went over after work and on weekends to help however I could. We were there constantly, trying to make her comfortable and spend as much time with her as possible. Patricia lived about 2 hours away and worked in real estate. She had money, a big house, and spent most of her time posting on social media about her perfect life. When Grandma got sick, Patricia suddenly became very involved. She started showing up at the house whenever my mom and I were there, acting overly concerned and taking charge of conversations with doctors. She'd talk over my mom and position herself as the primary caregiver, even though she was barely around. About 2 months into Grandma's illness, Patricia suggested that Grandma should update her estate planning. She said things needed to be organized properly and that Grandma's will was outdated. My mom thought it was reasonable, since Grandma's will was about 15 years old. What we didn't know was that Patricia had already been in Grandma's ear about how my mom wasn't responsible with money and how I was too young to handle an inheritance properly. Grandma had always been sharp, but the cancer and the pain medications were affecting her cognition. Some days she was completely lucid. Other days she was confused about what year it was. Patricia started visiting on days when my mom and I weren't there, spending time alone with Grandma. She brought her own lawyer, someone she knew through her real estate work, and had papers drawn up. My mom found out about the new will after Grandma signed it. Patricia mentioned it casually one day, saying everything was taken care of now, and Grandma could rest easy. When my mom asked what had changed, Patricia said it was just technical updates and nothing to worry about. My mom trusted her sister and didn't push it. I had a bad feeling, but I was 23 and didn't think I had any right to question family decisions. Grandma's condition deteriorated quickly after that. She had about 4 months total from diagnosis to when she passed. Toward the end, she was barely conscious most of the time. Patricia was there constantly those last few weeks, hovering, making decisions, and keeping my mom and me at arm's length. She said Grandma needed peace and quiet, and that too many visitors were overwhelming her. When Grandma died, my mom was devastated. She'd lost her mother and barely got to say goodbye properly because Patricia had controlled access so much at the end. The funeral was a blur. Patricia played the grieving daughter perfectly, posting tributes on social media and accepting condolences like she'd been the primary caregiver. The will reading was scheduled for 2 weeks after the funeral. My mom almost didn't want to go. She said it felt wrong to think about money when she was still grieving. I convinced her we should both be there to honor Grandma's wishes and to make sure everything was handled properly. We sat in the lawyer's office, Patricia's lawyer, and he read through the will. The house, which was worth about $400,000, went entirely to Patricia. Grandma's savings, about $180,000, went entirely to Patricia. Some jewelry and personal items were listed for my mom, things with more sentimental than monetary value. I got nothing, not even a mention. The will stated that Patricia had been the primary caregiver and deserved to inherit the bulk of the estate for her dedication and sacrifice. My mom just sat there with tears running down her face. She didn't say anything, didn't object, just absorbed the betrayal quietly. Patricia had this small smirk on her face like she'd won something. She said something about how Grandma had made her wishes clear and we should respect them. The lawyer asked if there were any questions. My mom shook her head and left. I was furious, but I didn't show it in that office. I drove my mom home and she cried the whole way. She said she couldn't believe her own mother would do that to her, that she must have done something wrong to deserve being cut out. I told her this wasn't about her, that something was off about the whole situation. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about how Grandma had been on those medications, how Patricia had isolated her at the end, how convenient it was that Patricia's own lawyer had drawn up the will. I started going through my phone, looking at old text messages and voice recordings from the past few months. I'd gotten into the habit of recording conversations when Patricia was around because she had a tendency to deny things she'd said or twist situations later. I found a recording from about a month before Grandma died. Patricia was talking to someone on the phone in Grandma's kitchen while I was in the living room with Grandma. She didn't know I was recording. She was complaining about how senile Grandma had become and how easy it had been to convince her that my mom was irresponsible. She laughed about it. I found text messages between Patricia and someone, probably a friend, where she talked about making sure she got everything because she'd earned it by putting up with Grandma all these years. She called Grandma a burden in one text. She said in another text that my mom was too soft and would never fight back. Then I started looking at financial records. Grandma had given me access to her online banking a few months before she died, so I could help pay bills if needed. I went back through the statements and found multiple large transfers to Patricia over the past year. $15,000 here, $20,000 there, always with vague descriptions. After the new will was signed, there were even more transfers. Patricia had been draining Grandma's accounts while she was sick. I took everything to a lawyer who specialized in elder law and estate disputes. His name was David, and he'd been recommended by a friend of my mom's. I showed him the recordings, the text messages, the financial records, and the timeline of events. He listened to everything and then told me we had a strong case for undue influence and possible elder financial abuse. The problem was my mom. She didn't want to fight. She said Patricia was still her sister and she couldn't handle a legal battle while grieving. I told her this wasn't about the money. It was about what was right. Grandma had been manipulated when she was vulnerable, and Patricia had stolen from her while she was dying. After a week of convincing, my mom agreed to let David file a challenge to the will. We filed the petition about a month after the will reading. Patricia lost her mind when she got served. She called my mom screaming about betrayal and greed. She called me a manipulative brat who was turning my mom against her family. She posted on social media about ungrateful relatives who couldn't respect a dying woman's wishes. Her friends commented with support and outrage on her behalf. The legal process took almost a year. David subpoenaed medical records showing Grandma's mental state during the time the will was changed. He brought in an expert witness who testified that someone on Grandma's medication regimen and with her diagnosis would have been highly susceptible to manipulation. He presented the recordings of Patricia calling Grandma senile and bragging about manipulating her. He showed the text messages and the financial records. Patricia's lawyer tried to argue that the gifts were voluntary and that Grandma had simply recognized Patricia's superior caregiving. But David had statements from Grandma's doctors and nurses who confirmed that my mom had been the primary caregiver and that Patricia had rarely been around until the last few months. He had visitor logs from the hospice nurses showing who was actually there, day to day. The most damaging evidence was a signature analysis. David had hired a forensic document examiner to look at some of the financial documents. Several of the large transfers had authorization forms with signatures that didn't match Grandma's handwriting from other documents. Patricia had forged at least 3 signatures to authorize transfers to herself. The judge invalidated the new will based on undue influence. The original will from 15 years ago was reinstated. That will split everything evenly between my mom and Patricia. But then the judge went further. Based on the evidence of financial exploitation, he ordered an investigation into elder financial abuse and ruled that Patricia had to return all the money she'd taken from Grandma's accounts over the past 2 years. The total came to about $167,000. Patricia didn't have it. She'd spent it on renovations to her house, a new car, vacations, all the things she'd been posting about on social media. She had to take out a loan against her house to repay the estate. She also had to pay legal fees for both sides, which added another $45,000. The financial abuse investigation resulted in criminal charges, though she ended up pleading down to a misdemeanor and got probation because she was a first-time offender. The house was sold, and the proceeds split between my mom and Patricia, after Patricia repaid what she owed. My mom ended up with about $280,000 total after everything was divided. Patricia got about $95,000 after her debts were paid. My mom gave me $50,000 as a gift since Grandma had wanted me to have something. I tried to refuse, but she insisted. Patricia sent my mom a letter after everything was finalized. It was full of venom, calling my mom weak and saying I'd poisoned her against her own sister. She said the family was destroyed because of our greed. My mom read it once and threw it away, but Patricia kept sending letters. One came addressed to me about 3 months after the case closed. It was 8 pages of single-spaced hatred about how I'd ruined her life and turned her sister against her. She said I was evil and that karma would come for me. I framed that letter and hung it in my home office, not because I'm proud of destroying my aunt, but because it reminds me that standing up for what's right isn't always comfortable or easy. My mom still struggles with what happened. She lost her mother and then had to fight her sister. Some days she wonders if it was worth it. I remind her that Grandma deserved better than to be manipulated and stolen from in her final months. Patricia and my mom haven't spoken since the judgment. I heard through a cousin that Patricia had to downsize her house because of the loans she took out. Her social media went quiet after the case concluded. The perfect life she'd been broadcasting was built partially on money she'd stolen from her dying mother, and now everyone in the family knows it. Do I feel guilty about collecting that evidence and pushing for the lawsuit? Sometimes, late at night, I wonder if I should have just let it go. But then I remember Grandma teaching me to bake cookies in her kitchen, taking me to the park when I was little, and telling me to always stand up for what's right, even when it's hard. She didn't deserve what Patricia did to her. My mom didn't deserve to be cut out after spending months caring for her dying mother. Justice needed help finding its way home, and I was willing to be the one to help it get there. I'd do it again. My parents sold my childhood home behind my back, so I exposed their secret second family. Discovering that your childhood home was sold without your knowledge hits differently when you're 26 and thought you still had a key. I'm Elena, and when I drove past my family's house last month to grab some boxes from the attic, I found a moving truck and strangers walking through the door. Confused, I called my mom immediately. She sounded uncomfortable and said they'd decided to downsize, that they'd tried to tell me but I'd been so busy with work. She promised my belongings were in storage and I could pick them up any time. Something felt wrong. My parents weren't downsizing age. Dad was only 58 and Mom was 55, both still working full-time. The house was paid off, a beautiful 4-bedroom in a great neighborhood that had been in our family for 30 years. I'd grown up there, and my parents had always talked about it being where they'd retire and where grandkids would visit someday. Selling it made no sense, especially without really discussing it with me first. I pressed Mom for details and she got defensive, saying it was their house and their decision. She said I was being entitled, thinking I had any say in what they did with their property. That stung, but she wasn't wrong legally. Still, the whole thing felt off. My younger brother Cameron, 23, was equally confused when I called him. He hadn't known about the sale either, and our parents had been vague with him too. Cameron and I decided to drive to the new address Mom had given us for where they'd moved. It was across town in a small 2-bedroom condo, definitely a downgrade. When we arrived unannounced, Mom answered the door looking panicked. She tried to tell us it wasn't a good time, but we pushed past her into the condo. That's when we saw them. A woman about our age sitting on the couch with a teenage boy who looked remarkably like our father. The woman stood up nervously and introduced herself as Diana. The boy, who looked about 16, was named Marcus. Mom started crying immediately, and Dad emerged from the bedroom looking like he'd seen a ghost. In that moment, everything became horrifyingly clear. Our father had another family, a whole secret second family he'd been supporting for years, and that's why they'd sold our childhood home. The truth came out in pieces over the next few hours because Cameron refused to leave until we knew everything. Dad had met Diana 17 years ago during a work trip. She'd gotten pregnant, and instead of ending his marriage, Dad had decided to maintain both families simultaneously. He'd been living a double life, spending weekdays with us and weekends traveling for work when he was actually with Diana and Marcus. The financial strain of supporting 2 households had finally become unsustainable. Dad and Mom had decided to sell our house, split the proceeds, and essentially end their marriage so Dad could fully commit to Diana and Marcus. Mom was getting the condo and half the house sale money, about $400,000. Dad was moving to another state with Diana and Marcus to start fresh, also with his $400,000. Cameron and I sat there stunned as our parents explained this like it was a reasonable solution to a difficult situation. Mom knew about Diana and Marcus for over a decade, but had stayed because of finances and not wanting to disrupt our childhoods. Now that Cameron and I were adults, she was finally leaving. Dad actually seemed relieved to have it out in the open, saying he'd loved both families but couldn't keep up the charade anymore. I looked at Marcus, this 16-year-old kid who was technically my half-brother, and felt nothing but rage. Not at him, he was innocent in this, but at my father who'd built a secret life and was now dismantling our family like it was a business arrangement. The home I'd grown up in, where every room held memories, sold to fund Dad's fresh start with his other family. Cameron started yelling at Dad, calling him every name imaginable. Mom tried to defend her decision to stay silent, saying she'd done it for us. Diana sat quietly looking uncomfortable, probably realizing she was the other woman, even though she'd apparently thought she was Dad's actual partner for years. Dad had lied to everyone. I left that condo in shock and spent the next week processing what I'd learned. My entire childhood had been built on a lie. Every time Dad said he was traveling for work, he was with his other son. Every family vacation we took, Diana and Marcus were probably wondering where he was. Our family photos, our traditions, our memories, all of it had been happening alongside a parallel family we'd known nothing about. Then, the anger set in. Dad had stolen my childhood home to fund his escape with his secret family. Mom had enabled his lies for over a decade. They'd both decided their shame and financial arrangements were more important than being honest with their children. They'd sold our home without really consulting us, treating us like we were just inconvenient loose ends in their mess. I started digging into the finances because something still didn't add up. Our house had sold for around $800,000, and my parents were splitting it. But Dad had supposedly been supporting 2 households for 17 years. Where had that money come from? I accessed old financial records I still had from when I'd lived at home, and what I found made everything so much worse. Dad hadn't just been supporting Diana and Marcus with his salary, he'd been embezzling from his company. Small amounts over many years, channeled through fake consulting invoices and padded expense reports. Over 17 years, he'd stolen nearly $600,000 from his employer to fund his double life. The only reason he'd sold our house now was because an upcoming audit would expose the theft, and he needed cash to run. My father wasn't just a liar and a cheater. He was a thief planning to flee the state with stolen money before his crimes caught up to him. The house sale wasn't about downsizing or fresh starts. It was about converting assets to cash before his arrest. He was planning to disappear with Diana and Marcus to a state without extradition agreements, using my childhood home's equity to fund their escape. I sat on this information for 3 days, trying to decide what to do. Part of me wanted to protect Dad despite everything because he was still my father. Part of me wanted to burn his entire life down for what he'd done to our family. Cameron urged me to go to the police, but I knew that would destroy Mom's life too, since she'd benefited from the embezzled money, even unknowingly. Then I thought about Marcus. He was 16, just a kid. If Dad went to prison, Marcus would lose his father at a crucial time in his life. Diana would be left alone to support a teenager with no resources. They were victims of Dad's lies as much as we were. Did they deserve to have their lives destroyed because I wanted revenge? But I also thought about Dad's company, about the people who'd worked there and might lose their jobs if the embezzlement had hurt the business, about the principle that criminals shouldn't get to escape consequences by selling off family assets and fleeing, about the fact that Dad had been willing to steal from everyone, his employer, his family, everyone, to maintain his lies. I made copies of all the financial evidence and sent them to Dad's company anonymously, along with information about his plan to flee the state. I included details about the house sale timing and where he was planning to move. Then, I waited. The company launched an immediate investigation and found everything I'd found, and more. The total embezzlement over 17 years was actually closer to $900,000. Dad had been stealing more recently to prepare for his escape. The company filed criminal charges and froze Dad's assets, including his share of the house sale proceeds. He was arrested before he could leave the state. The arrest made local news because of the amount embezzled and the length of the scheme. Dad's double life came out during the investigation because prosecutors traced money to Diana's accounts. The story exploded. Prominent businessman arrested for embezzlement, had secret second family, attempted to flee. Our family name was everywhere. Mom's $400,000 from the house sale was also frozen initially as potential proceeds of crime, though her lawyer is fighting to get it released since she can prove she didn't know about the embezzlement. She's broke, living in that condo with no income and no access to the money she'd planned to live on. She calls me crying, saying I destroyed our family by reporting Dad, that we could have figured something else out. Cameron is furious with me. He thinks I should have talked to Dad first, given him a chance to return the money and avoid prison. He points out that Dad's now facing 15 to 20 years for embezzlement and fraud, that he'll be nearly 80 when he gets out. He says I made a choice that destroyed our father's life when I could have handled it privately. Diana and Marcus are devastated. Diana had no idea about the embezzlement and is now associated with a criminal. She's struggling financially because Dad's support is gone, and she has no claim to the frozen assets. Marcus is traumatized, losing his father to prison and learning his entire life was funded by stolen money. My half-brother's life is ruined because I reported our father. Dad's employer recovered some assets, but not nearly everything. They had to lay off a dozen employees because of the financial damage Dad's theft caused. Those people lost their jobs partly because I exposed what was happening, even though I was trying to prevent more harm. The company may not survive the financial and reputational damage. My extended family is fractured. My grandparents, Dad's parents, say I betrayed my own father and could have protected him. My aunts and uncles are split between supporting my decision and thinking I was vindictive. Family members who've known me since I was born now see me as the person who sent their relative to prison. I lost my childhood home, discovered my father's second family, learned he was a criminal, and then made the choice to expose him knowing it would send him to prison for potentially decades. Yes, he was guilty. Yes, he deserved consequences. But I'm the one who made sure those consequences were devastating and permanent. I could have confronted him privately, could have given him a chance to surrender or make restitution. Instead, I went straight to his employer with evidence that guaranteed his arrest and prosecution. Dad wrote me a letter from jail. He doesn't defend his actions but says I've become someone he doesn't recognize, someone cruel enough to destroy their own father. He says whatever anger I felt about the house and his lies, surely it didn't warrant ensuring he'd spend his remaining healthy years in prison. He's right that my choices meant the difference between Dad possibly getting help or mercy versus facing maximum prosecution. I got my revenge. Dad will be in prison for years, probably dying there. His reputation is destroyed, his families are fractured, and he lost everything. But I also destroyed Marcus's childhood, contributed to people losing their jobs, and ensured my mother will spend her later years struggling financially with no access to the money she'd planned to live on. The ripple effects of my decision to report Dad anonymously have hurt so many people beyond just him. My therapist asks me weekly whether I reported the embezzlement because it was the right thing to do or because I wanted Dad to suffer maximally for betraying our family. The truthful answer is, I wanted both justice and revenge, and those motivations became inseparable. Would I have reported a stranger's embezzlement with the same evidence? Probably. But would I have done it anonymously, with such perfect timing to ensure maximum damage? I don't know. Was I justified in exposing my father's crimes and ensuring his prosecution? Or did I destroy too many innocent lives in pursuit of revenge for my sold childhood home? My uncle sabotaged my business. I destroyed his reputation and fortune. Business. That's what my Uncle Leonard, 52-year-old, systematically tried to destroy when I, 31-year-old female, started a competing company in our family's industry. and I'm the reason he's now bankrupt, professionally blacklisted, and facing multiple lawsuits. Half my family thinks I brilliantly defended myself against a predatory relative, while the other half says I went too far in annihilating someone who was just trying to protect his livelihood from unwanted competition. I grew up working in my family's industrial supply business. My grandfather founded it in the 1970s, and by the time I was old enough to work, it was a multi-million-dollar operation supplying manufacturing equipment to factories across 3 states. Leonard, my father's brother, had been running the company since my grandfather's retirement 15 years ago, and he'd expanded it significantly through aggressive sales tactics and relationship building with major clients. I worked for the family company throughout college and for 5 years after graduation, learning every aspect of the business: procurement, sales, logistics, client relations, everything. I was good at it, genuinely passionate about the industry, and had strong relationships with many of our major clients. I'd assumed I'd eventually move into senior leadership and perhaps one day take over from Leonard when he retired. But Leonard made it clear he had different plans. He'd hired his own son, Brandon, 28-year-old, 5 years ago, and was grooming him to take over the company. This was Leonard's right as owner. The business had been left to him, not divided among family members, but it meant my career trajectory was capped. I'd never advance beyond middle management in a company run by Leonard, and eventually Brandon. After several conversations where Leonard confirmed I had no ownership path or executive future in the family business, I made a difficult decision. I'd start my own competing industrial supply company. I had industry expertise, client relationships, and enough savings to fund a startup. It would be risky, but staying in a dead-end position working for Leonard indefinitely wasn't appealing. I resigned from the family company professionally, gave appropriate notice, and started my own business. I was careful to operate ethically. I didn't steal client lists, didn't poach employees during my notice period, and didn't use any proprietary information from the family company. I simply leveraged my industry knowledge and personal relationships to build a competing business. Leonard was furious when he learned about my new company. He called it betrayal and family disloyalty. He said I was trying to steal his business after he'd given me employment for years. He made it clear he considered my competing business a personal attack rather than a legitimate career move. The rivalry became ugly quickly. Leonard started a deliberate campaign to destroy my startup before it could become viable. He contacted clients I'd been courting and told them I was untrustworthy and had stolen proprietary information from the family business. He spread false rumors that my company's products were inferior and that I was operating on the edge of bankruptcy. But Leonard went further. He started underbidding my quotes to clients by unsustainable margins, pricing his products below cost just to prevent me from winning contracts. He was willing to lose money on deals solely to deprive my startup of revenue. He also contacted my suppliers and pressured them to stop selling to me, threatening to pull his much larger orders if they continued doing business with my company. Leonard's sabotage was sophisticated and ruthless. He filed a frivolous lawsuit against me claiming I'd stolen trade secrets, knowing the legal defense costs would strain my startup's limited capital. The lawsuit had no merit. I'd been scrupulously careful about not using any proprietary information, but defending against it cost me $80,000 in legal fees over 18 months before it was finally dismissed. He also started a whispering campaign in the industry, suggesting I was difficult to work with, and had been fired from the family business for cause rather than resigning voluntarily. He told other business owners that I was unstable and that my company would fold within a year, so they shouldn't waste time building relationships with me. For the first 2 years, my business struggled badly. Leonard's interference made it nearly impossible to win major contracts or establish reliable supplier relationships. Several deals I'd spent months negotiating fell through at the last minute after Leonard contacted the clients with false information. My startup was barely surviving, and I was facing the real possibility of bankruptcy. But Leonard made a critical mistake in his vendetta. He became so obsessed with destroying my business that he neglected his own. His below-cost pricing to block my contracts was hemorrhaging money. His aggressive and sometimes unethical tactics were damaging his reputation. Several of his key employees became uncomfortable with his behavior and left the company, and one of them came to work for me, bringing valuable insights into Leonard's operation. That former employee, Sarah, told me things about Leonard's business that I hadn't known. Leonard was engaged in several practices that violated industry regulations and contractual obligations. He was misrepresenting product specifications to clients, importing equipment that didn't meet safety certifications while claiming it did, and was backdating inspection documents to hide compliance failures. Sarah had documentation of these practices: internal emails, falsified inspection reports, communications where Leonard explicitly instructed employees to lie to clients about product specifications. She'd been uncomfortable with these practices, which is why she'd left, and she felt I should know what I was actually competing against. I faced a choice. I could use this information to destroy Leonard the way he'd been trying to destroy me, or I could stay above the fray and focus on building my business ethically. The vindictive part of me wanted revenge for 2 years of sabotage that had nearly bankrupted my startup. But using this information felt like descending to Leonard's level. I agonized over the decision for 2 weeks, then made my choice. I compiled all the documentation Sarah had provided, added evidence I'd gathered of Leonard's attempts to sabotage my business, documented communications, below-cost pricing records, proving predatory practices, records of his threats to suppliers, and submitted everything to the Industry Regulatory Board and to several of Leonard's major clients. The response was swift and catastrophic for Leonard. The Regulatory Board launched a formal investigation into his safety certification violations and misrepresentation of product specifications. 3 major clients immediately canceled contracts worth over $2 million annually after learning they'd been sold equipment that didn't meet the specifications they'd paid for. 2 clients filed lawsuits for breach of contract and fraud. The industry association suspended Leonard's membership pending the regulatory investigation, effectively blacklisting him from certain types of contracts. His insurance carrier, after learning about the falsified documentation, threatened to cancel his coverage or dramatically increase premiums. His bank, concerned about the mounting legal liabilities, called in a business line of credit, creating a sudden cash flow crisis. Within 6 months of my reporting, Leonard's business was in financial collapse. The regulatory fines alone totaled $400,000. The lawsuits from defrauded clients were seeking millions in damages. The loss of major contracts and the inability to bid on new work due to his suspended industry credentials meant revenue had dropped by over 60%. Leonard was facing personal bankruptcy and the likely forced sale of the business he'd spent 20 years building. But I wasn't finished. I contacted every client Leonard had interfered with during my startup phase and provided them with documentation of his sabotage campaign, proof that he'd lied about my business, had engaged in predatory pricing to block my contracts, and had spread false information about my products and financial stability. Several of these clients were horrified to learn they'd been manipulated and switched their business to my company. I also filed my own lawsuit against Leonard for tortious interference with business relationships, defamation, and unfair business practices. My attorney argued that Leonard's 2-year campaign of sabotage had cost my startup approximately $500,000 in lost contracts, and had nearly destroyed my business through false statements and predatory practices. We were seeking substantial damages. The family reaction has been explosive and deeply divided. Some relatives think Leonard got exactly what he deserved. He'd been operating unethically for years and had viciously tried to destroy my business simply because he viewed me as competition. They believe his downfall was self-inflicted through his own misconduct, and that I simply exposed the truth. Others think I went too far, They acknowledge Leonard shouldn't have sabotaged my business, but argue that reporting him to regulators and clients was a disproportionate response that destroyed not just Leonard, but also Brandon and the employees of the family business. They say I chose revenge over finding a way for both businesses to coexist. My father is devastated. He's watching his brother face bankruptcy and potential criminal charges. And while he doesn't defend Leonard's sabotage attempts, he wishes I'd found a less destructive way to fight back. He's said that Leonard's downfall means the family business will likely be sold or shut down, ending my grandfather's legacy. Leonard's wife and children have called me vindictive and cruel. Brandon, who would have inherited the business, is now facing unemployment when the company folds. Leonard's wife says I've destroyed their family's financial security and their father's reputation because I couldn't handle business competition. My mother supports my actions more strongly, pointing out that Leonard started the war by trying to destroy my startup, and that all I did was reveal the truth about his unethical business practices. She says if Leonard hadn't been violating regulations and lying to clients, my reporting would have found nothing to expose. Industry colleagues are split. Some admire my resilience and think Leonard needed to be stopped before his unsafe products caused actual harm. Others think I should have reported the safety violations, but not provided information about his sabotage of my business, keeping personal revenge separate from legitimate regulatory concerns. My startup is now thriving. Many of Leonard's former clients have switched to me. I've been able to hire some of his best employees, and my revenue has tripled. But this success came at the cost of destroying my uncle's business and permanently fracturing my family. Leonard is facing bankruptcy, potential criminal charges for the falsified documentation, and the loss of everything he built over 20 years. I tell myself I was defending my business against someone who was trying to destroy it through unethical means. I exposed genuine safety violations and fraud that clients deserved to know about. Leonard brought his downfall on himself through his own misconduct. But I also can't deny that I wanted revenge. I wanted Leonard to suffer for the 2 years of sabotage that nearly bankrupted my startup. I wanted him to lose everything, the way he'd tried to make me lose everything. The regulatory violations I reported were real. But would I have reported them if Leonard hadn't spent 2 years trying to destroy my business? Probably not. So was I right to expose Leonard's regulatory violations and sabotage campaign, even though it destroyed his business and potentially my grandfather's legacy? Or did I go too far in pursuing revenge against family, using legitimate concerns as weapons to justify annihilating someone who'd wronged me? I succeeded in business, but the cost was my uncle's bankruptcy and permanent family destruction. I don't know if that trade was worth it. My uncle faked a medical emergency to steal my grandmother's house. I ruined him faked. That's precisely what my uncle Gerald, 52 years male, did when he fabricated a medical crisis to manipulate my dying grandmother into signing over her $650,000 home to him. And I'm 29 years female. The reason he's now facing elder abuse charges, has lost his real estate license, and is being sued by the entire family. Half my relatives think I'm a hero who protected our grandmother from exploitation, while the other half says I destroyed Gerald's life and career over a family property dispute that should have been resolved through mediation instead of criminal prosecution. My grandmother, Dorothy, raised me after my parents died in a plane crash when I was 7. She was my primary caregiver, my emotional support, and the most important person in my life. Dorothy owned her home outright, a beautiful 3-bedroom house in a neighborhood that had appreciated significantly. The property was worth approximately $650,000 and represented her major financial asset. Dorothy always said the house would be split among her 3 children after her death: my uncle Gerald, my aunt Patricia, 48 years male, 48 years female, and my late mother's share, which would come to me. She discussed this plan openly for years and had a will documenting this 3-way split. Last year, Dorothy was diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer. Her prognosis was poor. Doctors estimated she had perhaps 6 months. The diagnosis was devastating for our family, but we rallied to support her. I took family leave from my job to be Dorothy's primary caregiver, managing her medications, driving her to appointments, and ensuring she was comfortable. Gerald was minimally involved during Dorothy's illness. He'd visit maybe once every 2 weeks, stay for 30 minutes, and leave. He was a real estate agent who claimed he was too busy with work to help more substantially with caregiving. Patricia and I handled nearly all of Dorothy's care. About 3 months into Dorothy's illness, Gerald started showing up more frequently and spending time alone with her. He'd arrive when Patricia and I were out running errands and would be in Dorothy's room with the door closed when we returned. This seemed odd, but not necessarily suspicious. Maybe Gerald was finally stepping up to spend quality time with his dying mother. Then one morning, I came to Dorothy's house to help her with breakfast and found her extremely agitated and confused. She was crying and kept saying, "I didn't want to do it, but Gerald said I had to." She was disoriented. Her cancer medications sometimes caused confusion, but this seemed different, more distressed than confused. I asked Dorothy what Gerald had said she had to do. Through her tears and confusion, she explained that Gerald had told her he had cancer too. He'd said he had stage 4 colon cancer, the same prognosis as hers, and that he needed her house to pay for experimental treatment that might save his life. He'd convinced Dorothy that if she loved him, she'd sign over her house immediately, so he could start treatment before it was too late. Gerald had brought a notary to Dorothy's house the previous day when I'd been at my apartment. He'd presented her with documents transferring full ownership of her house to him alone. Dorothy, believing her son was dying and desperately needing her help, had signed the papers. The house was now entirely Gerald's. No 3-way split, no inheritance for Patricia or me. Just Gerald, as sole owner of a $650,000 property. I was stunned and immediately suspicious. Gerald had cancer? I'd seen him 3 days earlier, and he'd seemed perfectly healthy, making plans for a vacation and discussing upcoming real estate deals. Nothing about his behavior suggested he was facing a terminal diagnosis. I called Patricia immediately and explained what Dorothy had told me. Patricia was shocked and said Gerald had never mentioned any cancer diagnosis to her. We decided we needed proof of what Gerald had claimed before confronting him. I called Gerald's longtime primary care physician, Dr. Martinez, who'd been treating Gerald for years. I explained I was calling on behalf of our family because Gerald had told our dying mother he had stage 4 cancer. Dr. Martinez was confused and checked Gerald's records while I waited on the phone. Dr. Martinez confirmed Gerald had no cancer diagnosis, had never been tested for cancer, and was in excellent health based on his most recent physical exam 3 months earlier. Gerald had completely fabricated his terminal illness to manipulate our dying grandmother into signing over her house. I reported this to Patricia, and we immediately consulted with an elder law attorney. The attorney explained that what Gerald had done was likely elder financial abuse, using fraud and undue influence to obtain property from a vulnerable elderly person. The attorney recommended we file a police report and petition the probate court to void the property transfer. We did both. We filed a detailed police report explaining that Gerald had fabricated a terminal illness to manipulate Dorothy into signing over her house. We provided Dorothy's testimony, recorded while she was lucid and clear. Dr. Martinez's statement confirming Gerald had no cancer, and the timeline showing Gerald had isolated Dorothy from family to execute this fraud. We also filed an emergency petition in probate court to void the property transfer and restore it to Dorothy's name. The petition argued the transfer was obtained through fraud, undue influence, and exploitation of Dorothy's vulnerability while terminally ill and on medications affecting her cognition. The police investigation and probate case proceeded simultaneously. Detectives interviewed Dorothy multiple times, with her attorney present to protect her interests. And she consistently stated Gerald had told her he had stage 4 colon cancer and needed the house to pay for treatment. She said she'd have never signed over her house to one child exclusively under normal circumstances, but believed she was saving Gerald's life. Detectives also interviewed the notary who'd witnessed the property transfer documents. The notary confirmed Gerald had brought her to Dorothy's house, that Dorothy had seemed confused and upset during the signing, and that Gerald had rushed the process and discouraged the notary from asking Dorothy questions about whether she understood what she was signing. The probate court held an emergency hearing. Gerald's attorney argued the property transfer was valid. Dorothy had signed voluntarily, the documents were properly notarized, and there was no legal requirement that Gerald prove he had cancer before accepting property from his mother. He claimed Gerald's statements about his health were private medical matters and not relevant to the property transfer's validity. But the judge was not sympathetic. Evidence showed Gerald had fabricated a terminal illness specifically to manipulate his dying mother into transferring her major asset to him alone. The judge found this constituted fraud and undue influence that invalidated the transfer. He ordered the property returned to Dorothy's name and issued a restraining order preventing Gerald from being alone with Dorothy or discussing financial matters with her. Meanwhile, the criminal investigation expanded. Detectives discovered this wasn't Gerald's first exploitation of elderly clients. As a real estate agent, Gerald had been targeting elderly sellers, convincing them to list their properties with him at below-market prices, then buying the properties himself through shell companies and immediately reselling them for significant profits. The Real Estate Licensing Board investigated and found Gerald had violated multiple ethical rules and possibly committed fraud against several elderly clients. He'd exploited people who trusted him as their agent to enrich himself at their expense. Gerald was charged with elder financial abuse, fraud, and exploitation of a vulnerable adult. The prosecutor argued this was a particularly egregious case. Gerald had fabricated terminal cancer to steal from his own dying mother, showing calculating cruelty rather than ordinary financial desperation. The Real Estate Licensing Board held its own hearing and revoked Gerald's real estate license permanently. He was also fined $50,000 for ethical violations related to his exploitation of elderly clients. His real estate career was finished. But the consequences expanded further. Several of Gerald's former elderly clients filed lawsuits against him after learning about his arrest. They claimed Gerald had similarly manipulated them into selling properties below market value, and they were seeking damages for fraud and breach of fiduciary duty. Gerald accepted a plea deal to avoid trial. 2 years in prison, 5 years probation, permanent ban from working with vulnerable adults, and restitution of all legal fees Dorothy and the family incurred fighting the property transfer, approximately $45,000. The house remained in Dorothy's name, and her will remained unchanged. It would be split 3 ways as she'd always intended. The family reaction has been bitterly divided. Patricia fully supports me and believes Gerald got what he deserved for trying to steal from our dying mother. My grandmother, in her remaining lucid moments, expressed relief that the house situation was resolved and that Gerald wouldn't inherit anything after what he'd done. But Gerald's wife, Melissa, and their 2 teenage children are devastated. Melissa claims I destroyed their family because I couldn't handle complicated family estate decisions and should have worked things out privately instead of involving police and licensing boards. Several relatives agree with Melissa. They acknowledge Gerald shouldn't have lied about having cancer, but they think I overreacted by pursuing criminal charges and reporting him to the licensing board. They argue that a family conversation and mediation could have resolved the property issue without destroying Gerald's career and putting him in prison. Gerald's parents, Dorothy's ex-husband and his wife, have blamed me for tearing the family apart and said I should have respected that Dorothy signed the papers voluntarily, regardless of what Gerald told her. They've suggested I was motivated by greed, ensuring I'd inherit my share of the house, rather than genuine concern for Dorothy. Some extended family members think both Gerald and I were wrong. They say Gerald shouldn't have fabricated illness, but that I went nuclear by involving law enforcement and regulatory boards rather than pursuing civil remedies that would have resolved the property dispute without criminal charges or career destruction. Dorothy's longtime friends and neighbors overwhelmingly support my actions. They'd witnessed how little Gerald visited during Dorothy's illness compared to Patricia and me, and they were horrified to learn he'd exploited her final months to steal her house. They view the criminal prosecution as appropriate accountability. Elder rights advocates who learned about the case have praised my reporting. They've said elder financial abuse is dramatically underreported because family members feel guilty about turning in relatives, and that my willingness to prosecute Gerald protects other vulnerable elderly people from similar exploitation. The Real Estate Board has used Gerald's case as a cautionary example in training about agent ethics and vulnerability exploitation. Several elderly clients he'd previously worked with have come forward with suspicious transactions that are now being investigated. I've struggled with enormous guilt, despite believing I did the right thing. Gerald's children are teenagers, watching their father go to prison and their family face financial ruin. Melissa has had to sell their house to pay legal fees and fines. Gerald's real estate career, his livelihood for 20 years, is permanently ended. Gerald lost his marriage, too. Melissa filed for divorce while he was awaiting sentencing, unable to handle the shame and financial devastation. Gerald's relationship with his children is damaged, perhaps irreparably. Dorothy died 4 months after Gerald's sentencing. Her final months were peaceful, knowing the house situation was resolved and that her estate would be distributed as she'd always intended. But Gerald wasn't allowed to attend her funeral due to the restraining order, and he'll never have had the chance to make peace with his mother. I've asked myself repeatedly whether I should have confronted Gerald privately before filing police reports. Could a family intervention have resolved this without criminal prosecution? Would Gerald have voluntarily returned the house if I'd threatened to expose his cancer lie? Or would he have doubled down and hidden assets? The honest answer is, I wanted Gerald to face maximum consequences. He'd exploited our dying grandmother, fabricated terminal illness to manipulate her, and stolen her major asset for personal gain. I wanted him destroyed professionally and criminally, and I used every legal avenue available to ensure that destruction. But Gerald also committed crimes that extended beyond our family. His exploitation of other elderly real estate clients showed a pattern of predatory behavior. By reporting him, I potentially protected future victims. Would those protections justify the total destruction of Gerald's life and the collateral damage to his innocent family? So was I right to report Gerald to police and licensing boards after he fabricated cancer to steal our grandmother's house, even though it ended his career and marriage? Or should I have pursued civil remedies that recovered the property without the criminal and professional destruction? Dorothy's house stayed in her estate as intended. Gerald faced consequences, but his children and ex-wife are collateral damage, and I don't know if justice required that level of devastation. My sister sabotaged my adoption. I made sure she lost her social work license. Sabotaged. That's the word that perfectly describes what my older sister, Jennifer, 41, female, did when she deliberately derailed my adoption process to prevent me, 35, female, from becoming a mother. And I'm the reason she's permanently banned from practicing social work and is facing potential criminal charges. Half my family thinks I protected vulnerable children from an unethical professional, while the other half says I destroyed my sister's 20-year career because I couldn't forgive a personal conflict that should have stayed between siblings. Jennifer has been a licensed clinical social worker specializing in adoption services for 18 years. She built a respected career evaluating prospective adoptive parents, conducting home studies, and facilitating placements. She worked for a prominent private adoption agency and was considered an expert in her field. I was proud of her work and the families she'd helped build. I struggled with infertility for 7 years. Multiple rounds of IVF failed, and my husband, David, 37, male, and I eventually decided to pursue adoption. We were excited about building our family this way and believed we'd make loving, capable parents. We'd been married for 9 years, owned our home, had stable careers, and had always wanted to be parents. We applied to adopt through a reputable agency, not Jennifer's agency, deliberately, because we wanted to keep professional and family relationships separate. Our application process began with the standard home study, background checks, financial verification, and interviews. We were confident we'd be approved and were already preparing our home for a child. Then our adoption social worker called with concerning news. She'd received an anonymous report raising serious allegations about our suitability as adoptive parents. The report claimed David had an undisclosed criminal history, that I had mental health issues that made me unstable, and that we had financial problems we'd hidden from the agency. The allegations were detailed and specific, suggesting the reporter had personal knowledge of our situation. Every allegation was false, but they triggered a comprehensive investigation that delayed our adoption process by months. We had to undergo additional psychological evaluations, provide extensive financial documentation, and submit to invasive questioning about our personal lives. It was humiliating, stressful, and expensive. The additional evaluations cost us over $8,000. We eventually proved every allegation was false. David had no criminal history. My mental health was stable. I'd been in therapy years earlier for depression related to infertility, but I was healthy and well managed. Our finances were solid with no hidden debts or problems. The agency apologized for the delay and approved our adoption. But the damage was significant. The investigation had delayed our placement by 8 months, during which time we'd been matched with a birth mother who ultimately chose different adoptive parents due to our uncertain status. We'd lost a placement we'd been emotionally invested in, and the stress had strained our marriage and our mental health. I was determined to find out who had filed the false report. Adoption agencies protect reporters' anonymity to encourage people to come forward with legitimate concerns. But I hired an attorney who filed a legal motion arguing that malicious false reporting shouldn't be protected. After months of legal wrangling, we obtained limited information about the report's origin. The report had come from someone claiming to be a concerned professional with knowledge of the family's history. The reporter had used professional terminology and had demonstrated familiarity with adoption evaluation standards. They'd contacted the agency through professional channels rather than as an anonymous tipster, giving their false allegations more credibility. With this information, I began investigating who could have filed such a detailed, professionally framed false report. The list was short. Few people knew we were adopting, and even fewer had the professional knowledge to craft allegations that would trigger serious investigation. Then, I discovered something that made everything click into place. I was at a family gathering when Jennifer made a comment about some people not being cut out for parenthood, while looking directly at me. When I asked what she meant, she became defensive and said I was being oversensitive. But later that evening, I overheard Jennifer talking to our mother about adoptions. She said, "Some people think they deserve children just because they want them, but adoption is about what's best for the child, not fulfilling adults' needs." Our mother asked if she was talking about anyone specific, and Jennifer said, "I just think some of our family members would struggle with the reality of adoptive parenting." I confronted Jennifer privately and asked directly if she'd filed the false report against David and me. She initially denied it, then became angry and said I was paranoid and looking for someone to blame for our adoption delays. But her reaction was guilty. She wouldn't make eye contact and left the gathering abruptly. I contacted the adoption agency with my suspicions and provided Jennifer's professional credentials and contact information. The agency investigated and discovered that the anonymous report had come from an IP address at Jennifer's workplace and had been submitted using professional credentials from Jennifer's license number. which she'd apparently falsified on the report form to make her allegations seem more credible. The agency confirmed that Jennifer, my own sister, had filed the false report that derailed our adoption for 8 months. She'd used her professional position and knowledge to craft allegations she knew would trigger extensive investigation. She'd deliberately sabotaged her sister's chance to become a parent. When confronted by the agency, Jennifer finally admitted what she'd done. Her explanation was chilling and revealed deep resentment I hadn't fully understood. She said she'd filed the report because she genuinely believed David and I would be poor adoptive parents. She claimed my infertility struggles had made me desperate and unstable, that David was too passive, and that we were pursuing adoption for selfish reasons, rather than because we'd be good parents. Jennifer actually believed she was protecting a hypothetical child from being placed with inadequate parents. She'd convinced herself that her professional judgment about adoptive parenting applied to her own sister, and she'd used her position to intervene in what she saw as a potentially harmful placement. But Jennifer's stated concerns weren't reflected in any evidence. Our home study had been positive. Our psychological evaluations showed we were stable and well-prepared. Our finances were solid. Every professional evaluator who'd met us without bias had concluded we'd be excellent adoptive parents. Jennifer's concerns were purely personal judgments dressed up as professional assessments. The adoption agency filed a complaint with the state licensing board, as they were required to do when discovering professional misconduct by a licensed social worker. I also filed my own complaint, providing documentation of the false report, the harm it caused, and Jennifer's eventual admission. The licensing board investigation was thorough and damning. They discovered this wasn't Jennifer's first ethical violation. She'd previously made subjective, biased decisions about adoptive parents based on personal beliefs rather than professional standards. Several families she'd rejected had later been approved by other agencies, suggest Jennifer had been applying inappropriate personal criteria to professional decisions. The licensing board revoked Jennifer's social work license permanently. They found she'd committed serious professional misconduct by filing a false report against family members, had violated confidentiality and professional boundaries, and had demonstrated a pattern of letting personal biases influence professional evaluations. The revocation meant Jennifer could never work as a licensed social worker again in any state. Her employer immediately terminated her employment. Without a valid license, she couldn't perform any of her job duties. Her 20-year career in adoption services ended overnight. She also faced potential criminal charges for filing false official reports and for fraud related to falsifying professional credentials on the report she'd submitted. The family reaction has been catastrophic and intensely divided. Jennifer's husband, Mark, is furious with me, saying I destroyed Jennifer's career over a difference of professional opinion that should have been resolved through family conversation. He claims Jennifer had legitimate concerns about our adoptive parenting ability and that reporting me to licensing boards was vindictive overreach. My parents are torn. My mother thinks Jennifer acted inappropriately, but believes I should have handled this privately rather than filing formal complaints that ended Jennifer's career. She's said that family handles family problems internally, and that involving licensing boards was extreme. My father is more supportive, recognizing that Jennifer committed serious professional misconduct that potentially affected other families beyond just ours. Several family members have accused me of being vindictive and unable to forgive. They point out that Jennifer apologized, eventually under pressure, and that destroying her entire career was disproportionate punishment. They say I should have accepted her apology and moved on rather than pursuing maximum professional consequences. Jennifer's 2 teenage children have been devastated. They're watching their mother lose her career and face potential criminal charges. Jennifer's daughter sent me a message saying I'd ruined her family because I couldn't let go of hurt feelings, and that her mom would never financially recover from this. Other family members fully support my actions. My husband David is unequivocal. Jennifer deliberately sabotaged our adoption using false allegations and professional misconduct. She deserved every consequence she received. My brother thinks Jennifer had been abusing her professional position for years and needed to be stopped before she damaged more families. Professional colleagues in social work and adoption have mixed reactions. Some applaud my reporting serious misconduct that protected future adoptive families from biased evaluations. They note that social workers who let personal feelings override professional standards are dangerous and need to be removed from practice. Others think I should have reported Jennifer to her employer, but not to licensing boards, giving her a chance to receive training and oversight rather than permanent career destruction. They acknowledge Jennifer's misconduct was serious, but question whether permanent license revocation was proportionate. The adoption community, prospective and adoptive parents, overwhelmingly supports my actions. Several people have come forward sharing suspicions that Jennifer had rejected their applications based on personal biases rather than professional standards. They believe I protected vulnerable children from being placed, or not placed, based on a social worker's personal prejudices rather than evidence-based evaluation. Jennifer has attempted to contact me multiple times, alternating between apologizing and blaming me. In some messages, she acknowledges her actions were unethical and accepts responsibility. In others, she says I destroyed her life's work over a misunderstanding that could have been resolved through family mediation, and that I pursued professional complaints out of spite rather than principle. I've struggled with enormous guilt, despite believing I did the right thing. Jennifer's career is permanently destroyed. She'll never work in social work again. Her family is facing severe financial stress. She's told relatives she's struggled with depression and suicidal thoughts since losing her license. The extended family is fractured, with clear divisions between those who support me and those who think I was vindictive. David and I eventually successfully adopted a beautiful daughter, who's now 2 years old. We're happy parents, but that joy is complicated by knowing it came at the cost of permanently destroying my sister's career and fracturing our family. I've asked myself repeatedly, should I have confronted Jennifer privately and given her a chance to withdraw her false report before filing formal complaints? Would that have been more ethical, or would it have allowed professional misconduct to go unpunished? Should I have pursued employer discipline but not licensing board complaints, giving Jennifer a chance to keep her license while facing workplace consequences? The honest answer is, I wanted Jennifer to face maximum consequences. She deliberately sabotaged my chance at parenthood, using lies and professional misconduct. She'd caused months of delay, thousands in expenses, emotional trauma, and lost placement with a birth mother. I wanted her career destroyed, the way she'd tried to destroy my path to motherhood. But Jennifer also genuinely believed she was protecting a child, even if her judgment was flawed and her methods were unethical. She wasn't acting out of pure malice. She'd convinced herself her biased assessment of my parenting potential was valid professional concern. Does that misguided motivation make her misconduct less deserving of career-ending consequences? So was I right to file licensing complaints that permanently ended Jennifer's 20-year social work career? Or should I have pursued private family resolution that held her accountable without destroying her professionally? My daughter is home. Justice was served. But my sister's life and career are ruined, and my family may never recover.